From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio on the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine, May 17, 1999 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Wcw Slamboree Ufc 20 Reviews. WWF Breaks Ratings Records. More. By Observer Staff. It's hardly a surprise that the May 10th edition of Raw, with Nitro preempted due to an NBA playoff doubleheader, would break all existing Monday night ratings marks. Still, when the numbers came out, nearly everyone had to be floored. Raw drew an 8.09 rating, 7.76 first hour, 8.42 seconds hour, and a 12.1 share, making it the most watched and second highest rated pro wrestling program in the history of the USA Network. The original Royal Rumble on the USA Network on January 24, 1988 drew an 8.2 rating, although far fewer homes had cable. At that point, that was 3.2 million homes and less than 5 million viewers, as compared with 6,148,000 homes and an estimated 9.2 million viewers this past week. The figure is amazing because the previous week's total wrestling audience was approximately 10 million viewers. In the past, when either Raw or Nitro are preempted, the other program should be expected to gain only about 20% of the regular audience of the other show due to the preemption, and the last time Raw was preempted, Nitro gained far less than that. In this case, roughly half the regular Nitro audience tuned into Raw. This translates into more bad news for WCW for May 17th. The peak period was the 3-minute overrun for The Rock and Austin and Vince vs. Undertaker and Helmsley and Shane match with a 9.17 rating, making it the single most watched pro wrestling match in the history of cable television and the first match in cable history to top 10 million viewers, 6,968,000 homes and approximately 10.4 million. The highest rated quarter was an 8.61, 6,543,000 homes and about 9.8 million viewers, for Bradshaw vs. Farouk and Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe vs. Rodney and Pete Gas. Other TV ratings over the past week saw Sunday Night Heat draw a 3.84, Livewire did a 2.0, Superstars did a 2.0, and WCW Thunder on May 6 did a 2.80 rating, which would be its lowest unopposed number ever, in the Thursday slot. At press time, we don't have any figures for WCW Saturday night. The NBA doubleheader, which preempted Nitro on TNT against Raw, got slam dunked. The Detroit Pistons-Atlanta Hawks game, which went against the first 75 minutes of Raw, drew a 1.2 rating, while the Phoenix Suns vs. Portland Trailblazers game, which went against the remainder of Raw, did a 1.4. The WWF Raw rating, which will wind up being among the highest ratings for any program all year on cable, gives them even more bargaining leverage when it comes to striking a network deal for the fall season. The new schedules will be locked in over the next few weeks, so all deals are coming to crunch time. At press time, it is known that WWF has in recent weeks been negotiating with UPN for a proposed 1-hour show on Tuesday nights, and also negotiating with Fox, a larger, more high-profile network. Fox, however, at some point must have indicated wanting to own WWF outright, and there at least was a proposal made by the network to buy majority interest in the WWF, which was turned down, according to reports. At press time, UPN officials were expecting to announce the WWF deal within a week or two, and that as part of the deal that WWF and not UPN would handle the advertising of the show, although it wasn't 100% locked in. In addition, there has been at least some talk, although we don't know how serious, regarding WCW and the WB network, as well as it coming down to the wire for the Nashville network, which is expected to announce an 8 to 9 p.m. Friday night wrestling hour to lead into Roller Jam. It is believed either ECW or a new promotion headed by Howard Lipkett would be getting the time slot, and that a big part of the promotion for whichever show gets the slot will be provided by Acclaim, which would put out a video game for that promotion. The deal, if it goes to ECW, would probably wind up as the saving grace for a company that has been under major financial distress for the past several months. It's no great news revelation that World Championship Wrestling is in a popularity freefall. The current situation where ratings seem to be dropping weekly to dangerously low levels, once Nitro and Thunder drop below 3.5, the stations will have to sell ads at reduced rates and do make goods, and it becomes a real problem, and Nitro is just starting to fall below that barrier, and Thunder, which has been destroyed by weekly boring shows, is well below it, and where arena business and buy rates are falling as well, isn't a short-term problem and is a result of a long period coming home to roost currently of numerous serious problems, from a lack of strong leadership, to attitude among workers to the most serious of all, a total disregard for the fans when it comes to going out to present a good show, present the product advertised, and deliver storylines that make even the slightest bit of semblance among fans. But we all know the problems. We all know how they've started and what they are. And how a company with the highest payroll in the history of wrestling now has not one piece of talent that's really over it, and has the ability to pop a buy rate or draw a competitive rating on their own. The young guys were destroyed first by the problem of jealous older, and usually less talented but with far more name value wrestlers wanting to keep their spots. Then the older guys started falling apart due to bad booking and being in the company that was getting the rep among younger fans as the old guys' promotion. They were constantly turned, sometimes with absolutely no storyline, to the point nobody cared about any of them. A few weeks back, the only two that had anything left were Ric Flair and Bill Goldberg. Flair was turned heel, at least partially at his own request. And as mentioned before, he's very entertaining in whatever role he's put in, which more often than not is really dumb, but a drawing card, or in this case a ratings draw, can be hurt badly when put in a role people don't want him in, even if they remain entertaining. A few weeks back, Flair and Goldberg at least could be competitive head-to-head with whatever WWF had on. Now they aren't even close. Goldberg was hot-shotted, failing to win world title matches with a few hours build-up week after week rather than programmed for months to build to a big title match that could draw big money. Most in the company feel that the eventuality should be Goldberg as the top star and world champion, but even if he is, the truth of the matter is that he has almost nobody left that people are dying to see him face for a big feud. Flair became a comedic psycho geek in a day when pro wrestlers are supposed to be cool. And Nitro on May 3rd in Charlotte, his hometown, exemplified all the problems. Nitro got destroyed by 3 points in the ratings. They had to give away thousands of tickets in a city they should easily sell out for Nitro just to get a half house. And Flair was destroyed first as a character and then as a wrestler in front of a crowd which came specifically to cheer him. So we know Page was a flop as champ because the fans didn't accept him in the role. Nash in many ways will be worse because at least Page worked his ass off in the ring and had some great title matches. But just the idea of putting the belt on Goldberg isn't going to fix a thing. You can bring Hogan back as a face, or a heel, or reform the old NWO, wasn't that just done in January and where did that go? Or put Hogan vs. Nash, hasn't that been teased for years without being delivered? Or headline a pay-per-view with Hogan vs. Goldberg and it may provide a momentary blip, but all the problems will remain. The answers are a lot more complicated, and the first and most important one is honestly assessing the situation and the problems, like an alcoholic has to do to recover. Once they are assessed, correcting them isn't as hard as it looks, but it will take time and patience, traits WCW, in its incessant attempts to win Monday night rating wars that it hasn't shown up to this point. WCW has to rebuild and come up with a new direction and purpose. To rebuild and change direction, they have to accept the fact numbers are going to go down a lot more for a long time before they go up, and not stray the course. The new direction can't be the type product of pro wrestling they are delivering. It has to be a new product, and there are many successful ones to choose from, which could be more soap opera oriented, and in this country it almost has to be, or it could be dramatic athletically oriented, which today, because of how our fans have evolved, would be very difficult to sell to the masses at first because it's new and keep fresh because all the television product will burn straight athletics out, but anything done correctly with purpose eventually can work. The announcing and structure has to be totally overhauled to where people know the old is dead and buried. A half dozen new stars have to be the focal point and what everything is built around. A few could be guys on the roster today, given the mega push. Most have to be new faces, and this is where it gets hard, because they aren't there in minor league groups and they have to be found, taught, and groomed. That's a long-term process. They have to be trained and sent somewhere to learn. To work, this is a multi-year plan and some lean times are going to have to be accepted, and this is a business where to fans and to everyone, everything is judged on what you did the last Monday night. They won't be over at first and won't draw ratings, but as WWF has shown clearly, if you are positioned as a star, you become a star in spite of whatever weaknesses and lack of depth you might have. Look at the history of Rocky Maivia. The guys on top in WCW buried the middle guys for so long in Eric Bischoff's mind that he never gave them the chance, and now they are deep in the grave, and the guys who should be headlining today are the guys who people see as unimportant and switch channels away from in droves. And the guys on top with a decade or more of television exposure as stars? They've been replaced as stars by a new generation, but instead of new generation guys in their company, it's guys on the other channel. WCW got plenty of mileage out of people like Savage and Hogan that McMahon gave up on many years too early. They got some huge buy rates out of Piper. But they're done now, and signing Piper to a reported 3-year contract and making him one of the main characters on television is simply mind-blowing. Hogan can't be a face and he can't be a heel. Savage's return meant very little, particularly considering just how hot a program he left with against Hogan and Bischoff, causing the injury that laid him out for nearly 1 year, none of which is acknowledged today, so he's basically come back with no storyline reason, helped Flair for no reason. Where did that come from? And now is helping Paige, which makes even less sense. And he's in danger of becoming a Mark Marrow whose girlfriend is the star of the act. And even worse, look at how they've all been used and who they've been programmed with. Instead of Flair versus Kidman, Hogan versus Goldberg, Hall versus Jericho, Piper versus Raven, Benoit versus Sting, Savage versus Eddie Guerrero, Hart versus Booker T, Luger versus Conan, or whatever, etc. as all-out major feuds with the younger guy scoring clean wins on major shows. They can switch wins back and forth in most cases. As long as the young guys get some wins, they'll be taken seriously as top guys that are emphasized by the announcers as having created new superstars, and where the mid-level wrestlers benefit from the star power of the established star. Most of these matches have never taken place, and those that did, were done once and never followed on. Of all the so-called top names in WCW past 40, the only ones who have actually done any jobs to elevate mid-level wrestlers were Nash for Mysterio Jr., which was a total joke although it came off better than expected, Hogan for Goldberg, which wasn't planned out and came in the wrong venue, should have been on a major pay-per-view show with months of build-up, but was still a huge success at the time, Hall for Jericho and Garza more than 1 year ago, which was portrayed on TV as jokes and nothing more than giving the fans a momentary pop that never was referred to again, and in both cases and actually hurt the winners more than helped them. Hall for Conan, I believe on a WCW Saturday Night episode which was never emphasized, and while it could have helped Conan, in reality it didn't. And Hart for Booker T, which was an excellent match and should have propelled Booker T to the top, except the announcers and storylines never brought it up again, so it, too, was nothing more than a momentary crowd pop forgotten in the morass of hours of wrestling product every week. Fans who remember how legends like Steamboat and Flair, smaller talented guys, got over at the beginning, was by being mixed in with the big stars and going over. Steamboat, who was less talented at that moment in time than Kidman is today, although he wound up being 2 or 3 years later one of the top workers in the game, and not a good interview, was a small guy with a nice look and was made into a superstar due to one TV win over Flair that was emphasized and built from. Really not a hell of a lot different from Booker T over Bret Hart. The result was more than 15 years of main events worldwide propelled out of it. How did ECW get its stars over? Among other reasons, don't discount Terry Funk's rub creating Douglas Dreamer, Sabu, Public Enemy, and taking Cactus Jack up another notch to where he became a superstar to take Sandman up, etc., and many more, guys who really weren't all that good, but they were in hot programs alongside or against a genuine legend, who put them over both in interviews, by being alongside him, and probably most importantly, in finishes. Creating new stars, many of whom have to be totally new faces to come up with a fresh image, means setting up real training. The power plant, for all its hype, has been a total flop. How many stars have come out of the power plant? The Giant, who didn't become a star because he was taught to be a skillful performer or a good interview, and Bill Goldberg. They both had an incredible can't-miss physical look and, for their respective sizes, exceptional athletic ability which overcame the fact that neither were anything close to complete packages when they were put out in front of the public. They got over on pure size, and because of the pure size, were given a strong push on television and the aura of raw power. Is the answer to find some young tall guys with some genetics and a little athletic ability, gas them to the gills, and push them to the moon? The power plant is filled with guys like that, almost all of whom are exposed as stiffs in their rare appearances on WCW Saturday Night. Real training is something the WWF has set up. Intensive camps run like the Japanese, followed with affiliations with minor league circuits where the guys can work a territory and do 4 to 5 matches per week in front of crowds and learn psychology before they are put into the big time. But that's also a small piece of the puzzle. The entire situation of house shows has to be changed. Either more emphasis is put on them, for wrestlers to appear as advertised, and top stars have to go on the road, or they should be cut back to mid-level B markets. You can't go into a New York, or a Los Angeles, or a Detroit or a San Francisco with half the big stars not there. The shows today can still turn a profit the way they were run, but the profit is getting to be smaller and smaller. And the smaller the crowds, the more people will see WWF, when they go and see a packed house, as the real show, and WCW as the secondary promotion in a country that really only loves the winners and doesn't care how they get there. In the long run, running major markets with bad shows is going to start chipping away and has been happening for months already. Really, the answer is not to drop those markets because they have to be run, but to get virtually all the stars to work those markets. Unfortunately, a lot of bad contracts are out there, and the guys who only work 5 shows a month for nitros and pay-per-view are often the highest paid guys and get the most television time and are the biggest stars. Then the New York or Chicago fans go to a WCW big event, with most of the top stars not there, and then to a WWF event, where every big star appears in some form. There is no bigger star in this business than Austin, and yet, he's on the road constantly. Unless WCW wishes to give up house shows, it has to work as hard as the competition does in providing good house shows, or it will remain the loser from a perception standpoint. The other company comes in with a 100% crew and people make comparisons, and these days, comparisons are strong in the other direction. Everything, from TV ratings to house show attendance to pay-per-view, all feeds off each other to some degree. The idea of going into Philadelphia and none of the advertised matches take place, which today for whatever reason doesn't seem that important as long as the stars advertised appear in some form, and have a half dozen or more no-shows, is something the company is paying for now and is going to pay for in the future. The idea that WCW could survive bad shows by coming to markets once every 6 months and the fans would forget, has led them to where they are today. 1 year ago, WCW was outdrawing WWF in a lot of markets. Now, you'd be hard-pressed by find one market that WCW could head up, stay even in. And then we come to booking. This regime has been a total failure. It appears its goal was to kill off certain stars, and it has been successful, but it's resulted in killing off almost everyone in the process to where nobody cares much about anyone. The wrestling business as it once was no longer exists. The ante has been raised incredibly by the work of Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara writing WWF television, and the ratings show it. It's a cop-out to say WWF is ahead because its wrestlers can swear more and women rip each other's clothes off. Yes, that is an advantage WWF has that works today. The thing is, by the standards of a normal weekly action-adventure television show, the WWF's writing is not all that good. If you watch the UPN special Thunder and ER on the same night, you'll realize as an action-adventure show, the UPN show was okay, but hardly top shelf. You'd always realize just how bad television Thunder truly is. It's just that wrestling writing has never been close to that of a regular TV show, and WWF's writing is fantastic when compared only with WCW. It's not even necessarily great compared to many older promotions that were hot in their day. But in the old days, guys would show up, fill up 8 segments with 8-minute matches, throw in an angle or two, send a few stars out to talk their shit, and you've written a 2-hour television show in a few hours, or even a few minutes. Today, writing television is a full-time 60-hour-a-week job. WCW still does things the old way. You can't have a wrestler, or wrestlers, or old-time wrestlers, writing television, unless they are willing to devote that kind of time to it and go through the detail work to make sure it makes at least a little bit of sense. And this crew has the other problem, a total inability to have storylines make sense. Where did, from a storyline standpoint, did Eric Bischoff come from? Why is he a face? And how did he get the power to overrule a finish that involved the so-called president and vice president? Well, he was 2 weeks ago, of the company. WCW's biggest problem is that the booking makes no sense. People get headaches watching the show because it's usually bad entertainment, bad long matches put on during a competitive segment, interviews where the guys have absolutely nothing pertinent to say, wrestlers who clearly have no idea where their program is going ahead of time and how to get it there. Everyone has turned 1,000,000 times to where the highest paid guys with years of national exposure in the business inspire confused as opposed to a fervent crowd reaction. Almost nobody has programs. And there's the upward mobility, or lack thereof, factor. At this point in time, Bischoff needs to either take control or step aside for someone else to take control. Major changes have to be made in regards to how talent is treated. I'm not advocating Bill Watts insanity because that doesn't work, but I still see a WWF where there are very few no-shows, usually fairly serious injuries, and it works in 1999. An entirely new system needs to be put in place, whether it's to give the aura of authenticity, which may be an outdated idea, or to hire creative scriptwriters to work alongside a very intelligent retired wrestler and make the point that everyone over 40 has to understand their day and the sun is waning and the only way to keep the spotlight is to effectively use their stardom to create a younger star. Probably even more importantly, an interview coach should be hired, whose job is specifically to teach Benoit, Mysterio Jr., Juventud Guerrera, Kidman to take the next big step. If people think Benoit or Kidman can't get over because their interviews aren't major league main event level, and speaking ability has never been more important, and if they won't use Arn Anderson as a mouthpiece for Goldberg or Benoit to make a strong Heenan/Bockwinkel main event act in a world title position, then at least coach them. If people think they can't get over because of their size, then give them some huge guys to beat, and it isn't like Nash, Luger, Sting, Flair, Piper, Savage, Hogan and Hall don't have enough of a star aura where if they put younger guys over, they could, if willing. And if they aren't willing, I don't see what purpose they have. Emphasize that fact, and guaranteed nobody will worry about anyone being big enough. And there are limitations. Mysterio Jr. can't be running around beating 300-pound guys without it working against him. People accepted Shawn Michaels as the top star in a territory just 2 years ago, and if he could go, they still would today. But he was given a lot of big guys and virtually every top guy in the promotion to beat at some point to get over. If guys can get this good in the ring, there's a decent shot. If given the work, they'd probably improve on interviews as well. In a very short time in ECW, Benoit's interviews made a marked improvement because he was given a lot of hands-on coaching, and he hasn't improved in that regard since leaving. Look at Lance Storm today. He was a worse interview than anyone in WCW just 1 year ago. Today he could be part of a great tag team championship team in any American company. And maybe Storm is more the answer as an unruined commodity than Benoit, who has been mid-card for so long that it's going to take a tremendous new paint job, new look, new outfit, new music, new surroundings, to change his perception. Remember how WWF changed Michaels, as an example, from a strong tag team wrestler to a mainline singles heel with the new music and giving him the rub from Sherry Martel, who had only managed the top heels in the company in the past. With rare exceptions, the matches with the 40-year-olds against each other should be eliminated unless there is a storyline need and bridge. WCW and the world doesn't need a Flair versus Savage program today, whether the matches will be entertaining and whether the dwindling crowds will pop big for the classic spots. The idea that Jericho is felt by most as a lost cause despite being with a company that needs him more right now than the opposition does, has to be rectified immediately. WCW has no chance for the rest of this year. The ratings on Tuesday should be longer be of the least bit of concern. But WCW's problems are getting worse by the week, because of the inaction in creating the momentum shift, not only in the eyes of the fans, but in the hearts of the workers by selling them on a new direction and battle plan, and getting rid of the ones who aren't team players. Without the latter, the former won't follow. If you have a championship caliber team one player short of winning it all, a kook like Dennis Rodman who no-shows practices but has unique talent may make a very good team a championship winning team and may be worth the headaches. And when things were good in WCW there were people who weren't as bad as Rodman, but you get the drift. But if you're the GM of a team falling in the standings that needs to build with draft choices and Rodman's on the roster, there's no alternative but to let him go. This is not to say any particular individual should go, but at this point no individual is making the company go by themselves. Anyone not willing to put over and help groom a younger stars has no purpose because the company needs to prepare to be competitive next year. And the television situation needs to be refocused. Every show should have a purpose rather than the current situation where everything happens on Nitro, which is usually a bad show as well. I'd put at least equal emphasis for now on Thunder. The advantage to Thunder is WCW could expose whatever new direction it wants to go on the show. You can do long interviews and long matches and tell stories in both, without worrying as much about channel switching. Nitro needs to be faster paced inherently. Saturday night should have a purpose. Whether it be personality profiles, building angles for Monday like WWF does with Heat, or exposing younger wrestlers but making it purposeful. If Lash LaRue gets a win on Saturday, he should appear on a Monday in an important match and perhaps get a win there. That way people see things as starting on Saturday night. That show drew huge ratings for decades and there is no reason with wrestling's popularity at the level it is, for the show to be dying except out of neglect. Nor is there any reason in 1999 for WCW to be in a free fall, except because the conditions that have led to it haven't been corrected. Slamboree was just another Sunday afternoon show. At another time, changing the world title, the world tag team titles and TV title all on the same night, plus having a match for control of the company could have made for two complete important pay-per-view shows by themselves. But nobody cares about titles and the control issue was turned into a farce. The result? While there was a crowd of 20,516 fans at the TWA Dome in St. Louis on May 9th for a card which on paper was loaded up with so-called name marquee matches, Only $13,789 paid for a gate of $494,795 and another $86,678 in merchandise in the same building where WCW drew nearly 30,000 paid and more than $900,000 in the midst of a horrible winter snowstorm less than 6 months earlier for a Nitro. The positive is the crowd that was there was great in reacting. For whatever reason, and I don't know if it's the heat show or what, but WWF crowds seem so dead on pay-per-view even when the matches are good, except for the main events that are usually great. WCW crowds are super into the early matches, usually get killed by a match somewhere in there and drag toward the finish, but that's usually because the match quality drags toward the finish. It seems so ordinary and so confusing. Kevin Nash got the world title from Diamond Dallas Page, but the title has been rendered almost meaningless by a combination of Page as champion and the Hot Shot double title switch just 2 weeks earlier on Nitro. Flair vs. Piper for control of the company wound up with Eric Bischoff returning from his storyline hiatus to reverse the decision and to an immediate babyface pop. We needn't waste time thinking about why Bischoff, last we saw as a bathroom attendant, now has the power to reverse decisions and order matches to continue. Because if the booking team didn't waste any time coming up with a semi-coherent storyline reason, why should we worry about it? Flair had been promised a pay-per-view win in real life in exchange for doing TV jobs for Sting, Nash and Page in succession, and didn't get it, and was talking loudly and publicly again about thinking he'd been double-crossed and wanting to be somewhere else, and was talking openly about leaving, although that isn't unusual either. Flair was told just before the match that they wanted to keep him as a heel in the same role, but plans were changed and Bischoff wanted to be portrayed again as the man running the company, but this time in a babyface role, and the idea that Flair had won the match making him president for life simply now didn't happen. Bischoff's idea to Flair was that Flair would continue to think he's president and play the half-nuts heel routine, but that Bischoff would then overrule his decisions. Flair's plans were to wrestle through February 9, 2000, at which point his contract switches from $725,000 to $500,000, and he's supposed to be used largely as a public relations person the final year of his contract and not as a wrestler, although God knows that can all change. After all the hoopla about Bret Hart quitting, he came back. He was literally called on the Friday before the show to come back and had to cancel previous plans to promote his movie in Toronto at a documentary festival, on orders from Bischoff to do a run-in on Bill Goldberg that appeared to take seconds in planning. To make sure nobody remembered it as anything significant, they had the Steiner brothers follow beating up both Goldberg and Sting after Hart had left. Hart, who was moving slowly and even had trouble getting into the ring, probably won't be ready to wrestle until July at the earliest due to his groin/abdominal surgery, so bringing him back for no reason made no sense on the surface, although it may have been done to explain Goldberg taking time off since he legit needs knee surgery and has needed it for a while. Goldberg was taken to the hospital after the show. It was speculated he had a broken ankle, but x-rays later that night revealed no break. He was wheeled out in a golf cart in front of the boys and either was in or was acting like he was in a lot of pain. Hart was profusely apologizing and upset, particularly since he's got the rep for never injuring anyone. Apparently he was to jab the chair into Goldberg's leg, but Goldberg lifted his leg while Hart was slamming the chair, so it hit the leg with a lot more force than it was supposed to. Or at least that's what the wrestlers were led to believe, and it may even be true. Goldberg was saying that he moved the leg and it wasn't Hart's fault, and his body is simply so worn down and beaten up by all the travel commitments of playing modern-day superhero, although the next day he was saying he wasn't hurt seriously at all. Some in the company, because of how convenient it all was for storyline, were thinking it was all a work on the boys, and some or all of it may have been. Other wrestlers who know Goldberg insist this was one of those weird coincidences where it is something that you'd think they'd work the boys on, except this time it wasn't a work. I'm not sure where the timetable of the knee surgery comes in, and you know WCW will desperately try and get him to postpone it, but the working plan was for Goldberg to challenge Hart on The Tonight Show on May 12th, bringing up again that he challenged Austin for $100,000, and he wants Hart so bad he's putting up $200,000. And then Hart on May 17th appear on the same show, say that he's quit WCW and can't have the match on Nitro or a pay-per-view show. They'll wind up some time before the end of the month with a compromise of having an alley fight in the parking lot of The Tonight Show, which, believe it or not, was the original idea Kevin Nash thought he could pull off somehow for Austin and or Shamrock against Goldberg and Nash, in the original brainchild of an idea which the Austin Challenge was trying to lead to. The problem is that Hart will be nowhere close to ready by then, but it's going to take place anyway. Oh yeah, with no build-up and for no reason. The Steiners are back together. The idea is that they will form a trio with Lex Luger, and Elizabeth will be in the picture as well. Buff Bagwell got bruised up for real, But he lived through Scott Steiner's rage, even if he was given very little offense in his match. Charles Robinson was damn entertaining. But when all was said and done, there were a bunch of ordinary matches, none great, most average, maybe two that were bad. 1. Raven, Scott Levy, and Perry Saturn. Perry Sotelo won a three-way over Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gutierrez, and Billy Kidman, Peter Gruner, and Dean Malenko, Dean Simon, and Chris Benoit to win the WCW tag titles in 1728. This was easily the best match on the show. There were a lot of real good moves in most of the interaction between the Kidman and Mysterio Jr. team, which seemed to get all the big pops, and the Horsemen team were excellent. Saturn seemed bothered by his bad back and did some good moves. Raven's timing was off a lot. The three-way also made the match unwieldy a lot, particularly since it went so long. Saturn at one point suplexed Kidman over the top to the floor. Malenko and Benoit did a double-team dropkick by Malenko into a German suplex by Benoit spot. Mysterio Jr. did a super moonsault block being flipped high in the air, landing on the top rope and moonsaulting back in. That one has a high degree of difficulty as I've seen Mysterio Jr. miss that spot a few times in the past. Everyone did their winning moves with saves. Kidman basically threw Mysterio Jr. into a Frankensteiner off the top on Benoit. When he tried the move another time on Saturn, he was caught and dropped with a power bomb off the top. Arn Anderson interfered and hit Saturn with a spinebuster and Malenko put Saturn in the cloverleaf. Canyon came out with a sting mask on and scooped Kidman's leg as he was on top going for a shooting star press on Raven. Raven used a DDT while Kidman was sitting on the top rope for the pin while they did the photo finish with Malenko having the submission on, but Raven got the 3 count before the Saturn tap to win the titles. 3¼ stars. 2. Conan, Charles Ashenoff, pinned Stevie Ray, Lane Huffman, in 6:10. At least it was short. Vince and Horace were interfering freely from the outside. Boy, were these guys in different matches. I couldn't believe how messed up some of the spots were. The worst were a spot where Ray was supposed to give Conan a short clothesline, and Conan was there and Ray swung and held up twice before doing it. What was that? Then there was the time where Ray came off the top and Conan put up his foot to the face, and Ray totally missed the foot and sold it. And the finale was Ray forgetting to duck low enough on Conan's low leapfrog spot and they nearly killed each other on that. Fortunately the crowd heat was pretty good. Mysterio Jr. saved the day and the finish was good, with Mysterio Jr. taking out the Keystone Cops with a dropkick off the apron on both and then hitting Ray with a Thez press off the top rope. Ray stayed on his feet holding Ray, follow me, and Conan schoolboyed him for the pin. 1/4 star. Page was backstage and made a deal with Bigelow. This never went anywhere for the rest of the show. Later Rick Steiner made a deal with Bagwell backstage, which at least made sense since they were doing a double cross spot. 3. Bam Bam Bigelow, Scott Bigelow pinned Brian Knobbs, Brian Yandrasovitz, in a Falls Count Anywhere hardcore match 11:29. This was a typical average hardcore match except Bigelow took tremendous punishment to get it over. The announcing was beyond horrible in this one. They were laughing at the headshots Bigelow is taking doing this routine where Mike Tenay would talk over them and they'd make fun of him while poor Bigelow was suffering brain damage trying to get a poor bad wrestling match into the 2-star range. Anyway, brutally hard shots with garbage cans, cookie sheets, etc. It went too long and with all the comedy overtones it seemed like guys killing themselves for no reason. They ended up brawling into a fake concession stand. The finish was poorly lit which made WCW seem minor league. Knobbs came off a riser's balcony and missed Bigelow and a table for a table break spot, which is how it was planned. Bigelow then suplexed Knobbs through a table and pinned him out there. 2 stars. 4. Rick Steiner, Robert Reach Steiner, won the WCW TV title pinning Booker T. Booker Huffman, in 11:08. Early in the show they showed internet interview with Steiner which was funny because they were doing the storyline about how Ray is interfering but T doesn't know, and Steiner talked about of course they knew because they are brothers, the Huffman brothers. No heat. Booker T either has really good matches or really bad matches depending upon if the guys are there taking the kicks right. Rick was never there. The finish, with Scott interfering and the Steiners getting back together, was at least good. T used his axe kick, sidewalk slam and missile drop kick but Scott ran in. Rick hit a clothesline for a near fall. Scott screwed up a few attempts at interference but Rick still kicked out of T's side kick. Finally Scott tripped T and Rick won with a messed up looking bulldog off the top rope. There was a big pop for the title change. 1/4 star. 5. Gorgeous George, Raymond Wagner, whoops, that's the other one, pinned Charles Robinson in 10:39. Robinson came out with his hair bleached and cut to look exactly like Flair. He was great doing his little nature boy routine with the strut and the flare moves. George had Savage, Miss Madness Mona, Starla Saxton, not her real name, and Medusa at ringside, while Robinson had Arn Anderson, Flair, and the new bodybuilder woman called Asia. You know, because she's bigger than China. Real name Christy Wolf out there. Robinson body slammed Miss Madness on the floor and she was carried out. George and Sir Charles traded chops. Robinson did the Flair flip into the buckles, ran across the ring and got slammed off the top. He also did the face first bump and the kickouts just before 3 on the near falls. Asia attacked George's leg. Medusa kicked Asia. Robinson used the figure 4 but George reversed it. Flair and Savage both got involved and Savage wound up giving Robinson a low blow and a body slam, allowing George to come off the middle ropes with an elbow. Both George and Robinson gained a lot of respect backstage, because it was clear George had trained very hard and did well in her first pro match, and because Robinson was literally fantastic in his role considering it was his first time out. 1.5 stars. 6. Scott Steiner. Scott reached Steiner, pinned Buff Bagwell, Marcus Bagwell, to retain the U.S. title in 7-11. There was legit heat between Bagwell and Steiner, and all week long there were rumors, not that this would be a shoot, but that Bagwell would wind up with some lumps. Scott potatoed him several times and Bagwell the next day had some major league lumps. Mostly Scott worked with him, but there was a real stiff kick and a few clubbing forearms that clubbed harder than usual. Mainly a one-sided match with Scott killing him. Bagwell was given his comeback with a few chair shots before ref Billy Silverman got bumped. Rick Steiner came out and acted like he was going to hit Scott with a chair, but of course hit Bagwell instead. Scott put Bagwell in the recliner for the win. 2.25 stars. 7. Roddy Piper Roderick Toombs beat Ric Flair, Richard Fleer, via DQ in 12-10. Robinson came out to ref and they fired Johnny Boone. How much you want to bet Boone has a job next time WCW is on television? I can't even keep up with who is and isn't fired. Oh yeah, everyone in this angle has been fired but nobody is fired. They traded a lot of hard chops. Piper did his boxing gimmick. It wasn't great and probably wasn't even good, but it was still the second best match on the show and that's saying a lot with Piper involved. Anderson pounded on Piper early. Asia, I promise out of habit I'm going to be mistyping her continent as Asia and Osai half the time, gave Piper a low blow and Piper sold that blow more than any blow he's received from any wrestler for the last 15 years. They did the figure 4 and the reversal spot. Piper decked Anderson. Piper pulled Flair's trunks down. Piper was getting all kinds of near falls on Flair but Robinson was talking to Anderson and Asia and not seeing them. Finally Piper slammed Flair off the top and put the figure 4 on. Flair said verbally that he quit but Robinson ignored that. Anderson dropped a knee on Piper but Piper came back and used the sleeper on Anderson and then on Flair. Asia broke it up and Piper kissed her, then put the sleeper on her. She was out. Flair pulled out an object and KO'd Piper with it for the pin. Bischoff, mainly to cheers, then came out and reversed the decision. Piper fired Flair. Bischoff and Piper hugged as Bischoff said he's done a lot of bad things in the past but this time he was doing the right thing. 2.5 stars. 8. Sting, Stephen Borden, no contest Bill Goldberg in 8-17. The two messed up a lucha spot early. The crowd didn't boo either guy, but didn't cheer either guy much either. A couple of things were off but Goldberg did some cool power move and Sting had his working shoes on. You know, the ones all taped up with that white tape, although some days they aren't working shoes. Sting hit 2 stinger splashes and when he went for a third, Goldberg power slammed him. Hart showed up at this point and decked referee Mickey J and delivered several chair shots to Goldberg. After Hart left, the Steiners came out and attacked by Sting and Goldberg. 2.25 stars. 9. Kevin Nash pinned Diamond Dallas Page Falkenberg, to capture the WCW heavyweight title in 1645. Page worked hard to carry the match as Nash did very little. Page undid a turnbuckle pad which wound up being used on him later. Page hit Nash with a mic for a near fall. Nash threw Page into the metal. Page used the diamond cutter on the floor and went for the pin. The ref wouldn't count and Page got mad saying he thought it was a falls count anywhere match. Page wrapped Nash's knee around the post and did the figure 4 around the post spot. There was a fight in the stands which distracted the live crowd from the match. Nash used a hard clothesline into the corner and his snake eyes on the exposed metal before delivering the jackknife. Savage then interfered for a DQ at 13:01. Savage hit Nash with the belt. Bischoff came out and ordered Savage to leave and ordered the match restarted. He said he didn't care what Ted Turner or Harvey Schiller was going to do to him on Monday and what the rules of the match were, it was being restarted. Page tried to use a chair but Nash moved and the chair hit the ropes and rebounded in Page's face a la a Terry Funk spot. Page came back with a low blow. When he tried another chair, Page used a high kick of the chair into Page's face and delivered the jackknife at 3:44 of the restarted match for the pin. There was no major post-match celebration. 1.5 stars. U.S. News & World Report in its May 17th issue put pro wrestling, and really Vince McMahon, as its cover story with a photo of Val Venis from behind wearing a towel claiming pro wrestling is brash and bawdy. With 35 million viewers, it's also become big business. The 7-page spread, a profile on McMahon, with reporter Lynn Rossellini obviously charmed by McMahon's candor about taking steroids, in the past when they were legal of course, and repeatedly cheating on his wife, bought the rest of his story, hook, line and sinker. The story opened with a scene of 6-year-old Vince beaten bloody with a screwdriver or a wrench by his mean stepfather, and had the 35 million viewers, which looks to be the new media buzz figure, and Titan Sports taking in $500 million annually worked figures. The story was positive toward McMahon as a successful promoter, and he is a great one, and as a person, which is of course more of a debatable subject, but not at all of his product, and portrays him as almost the be-all and end-all of pro wrestling's popularity with virtually no credit given to anyone else. It noted that a host of social critics feel McMahon's message aimed at young audiences are the vilest messages of our time, racial stereotypes are okay. Ogling women and making crude remarks are the marks of a man. It's cool to tell people to kiss my base or suck it. And if you disagree with someone, bash them. McMahon was described as being an affectionate, affable man with disarming candor, almost portrayed as this nice man who simply doesn't get it, to borrow his own company's phrase, regarding what he's somehow responsible for. It noted the Inside Edition/Indiana University study and had Howard Spivak, chairman of the American Academy of Pediatrics Task Force on Violence, claimed the wrestling shows are inappropriate for children. Probably the only groundbreaking in the entire story was how little research has been done on pro wrestling effect on children other than a 1994 Israeli study on 3rd through 6th graders who watched WWF, and that fighting and injuries increased to levels never seen before in that culture, and when WWF airtime was reduced, the violence among schoolchildren diminished sharply. Of course, the 1994 WWF product was completely different than today. Steve Austin was quoted as saying, "I get a little turned off with some of the sexual overtones. I don't dig any of that racism." It claimed McMahon, who tries to adhere to a moral code in private life, strangely seems disconnected from the moral implications of his product. The story, which overall was surprisingly positive until the finish, noted the same sleazy aspects of Raw that every story does, but said that McMahon's product isn't as bad as a Mel Gibson movie because of its cartoonishness and fake wrestling moves. Mick Foley claimed that even Snow White has more blood and gore than WWF, and if WWF did a storyline where an evil stepmother requested a heart be brought in a box, that WWF would receive a media uproar. It claimed in the Littleton, Colorado massacre, that both one of the killers and one of the victims were big wrestling fans. Of course, I don't think that's germane to anything, because one of the killers and certainly many of the victims were probably also basketball and football fans or horror movie fans, and there is no link that those killings were wrestling inspired, nor should wrestling get any special praise because probably more than one of the victims were regular Raw watchers. The story lost me with the philosophical comparisons to Homer, Carl Jung and ancient Greek myths, as if the guys doing the storylines for WWF are doing anything other than trying to draw ratings on Monday nights by tapping into what they think about teenagers today think about and what they remember of their own adolescent years, and I'm sure they're not looking at their old Greek mythology books for ideas. The short version of history this time is that wrestling was a huge hit in the early days of television but by the late 60s had dropped in popularity. Vince got in the game in 1971 and started promoting in the Northeast. He then started buying out regional promoters, so that's what he did in the latest incarnation of The Truth, and turned it into a national company. In the early 80s, he acknowledged outcomes were predetermined. Wasn't that 1989? 10 years later now, that would be this year, a federal investigation on steroid use threatened to scuttle the company, but Vince beat the charges, while admitting he did use steroids when they were legal. But during the trial, Turner signed Hulk Hogan away from him. Actually, Hogan had quit WWF 11 months before going to WCW because McMahon wanted to phase him down from the top star position in favor of Bret Hart, and he left to do a TV series and work big shows in Japan rather than pass the torch, and put Nitro opposite Raw, with Nitro winning for more than a year and a half before McMahon turned it around. At least that part of the story is accurate. The story also had a pair of sidebars. One about a 29-year-old independent wrestler, Kevin Duncan, who wrestles as Super T for the NWA Southwest promotion in North Richland Hills, Texas, and a second about college students at American University in Washington, D.C. that watch wrestling, as if that's something that never happened before in history. The story ended with a story about McMahon as a parent alleviating 4-year-old Shane's fear about Dracula going to get him by telling his son Dracula is dead. It ended, as a father, McMahon understood the importance of quieting a child's fear about violence and terror. But a wrestling promoter's job, he tells interviewers, is not that of a parent. So don't expect McMahon to slay one of parents' current nightmares, the sordid spectacle of professional wrestling. That's one monster that he prefers not to see. The UFC's long road to create a heavyweight champion ended, in many people's eyes, with a highway robbery. Officially, Boss Rutten won a split decision over Kevin Randleman after 21 minutes on May 7 in Birmingham, Alabama at UFC 20 to win the company's first World Heavyweight Championship match in almost 17 months after Randy Couture won the title in Japan and, due to a contract dispute, never returned to defend it. Unofficially, this was the single most controversial judge's decision in the history of UFC. While there was not a 100% consensus that Randleman won the match, the general feeling was that he did. My initial reaction to the split decision was stunned, as when the fight was over my feelings were that Randleman had won just as strongly as Lennox Lewis had beaten Evander Holyfield in boxing's most famous recent title robbery. After viewing the fight the next day, I could see where it was a lot closer fight, but I'd still have Randleman as the solid winner. Tim Catalfo, Bill Goldberg's business partner in the OBK martial arts gym in the Atlanta area, voted for Randleman, feeling he had won the fight solidly. The other two judges, Dan Murliata and Skip Hall, went with Rutten, both saying it was a very close fight. Here were the particulars. Randleman took Rutten down and pummeled him for the first 4:30, bloodying him up badly around both eyes and breaking his nose. At that point the match came very close to being stopped, but Rutten wanted to continue, and in his post-match interview, said even he had some doubts and came close to quitting. Randleman tired out at this point. However, Randleman took Rutten down every time there was a stand-up, 5 times in all during the fight. Not once did Rutten escape himself. He was stood up to check his cuts once, got a second stand-up when the action was lagging on the mat, and got time limit stand-ups at the end of regulation in the first overtime. As the match wore on, Rutten punched a lot more from the bottom than Randleman, and Randleman was just holding on from the top. Even though he was on the bottom, Rutten was winning at the finish. For the fight, Rutten hit Randleman 101 times, almost all either a few elbows, several palms and mainly punches from the bottom, none of which had serious effect, but he was busier for most of the fight. Randleman hit Rutten 45 times, 38 of which were in the first 5 minutes, but because he was punching downward, the blows had better leverage and were more effective and did far more damage. Even though Rutten was fresher and the match went on, he was still taken down every time and virtually never got to play his game. However, being so badly bloodied and on the bottom the entire fight and not quitting when others certainly would have, made him a heroic warrior and solidified him as the crowd favorite, and it's a performance that'll go down in martial arts history as the defining moment of his career. The judge's decision was not booed any more than any close fight decision gets booed. I tried to score the fight minute by minute and had 6 minutes for each and the other 9 minutes as even, most of which with Randleman on top and neither delivering any significant blows from that position. Certainly Randleman's 4 minutes won in the first 5 were far stronger than any of the minutes won by Rutten. It was among the great fights in UFC history and saved what had not been one of the better shows up to that point in time. There was talk of booking a rematch for September, although Randleman was going absolutely crazy after the fight to the point feeling he'd been robbed badly. There was a lot of conjecture, being that people should be suspicious in this world of everything, that because Rutten is being marketed as the star and he's, in some people's opinions, lucked into 2 wins in his only 2 appearances, that there are cries of fix. The feeling in the Tsuyoshi Kosaka match was that Rutten was given a gift stand-up when Kosaka was controlling him on the ground and scoring, and I'd agree that there shouldn't have been a stand-up at that point, except that John McCarthy at the rules meeting was very specific about what would happen on the ground if things weren't being worked to a finish, not staying busy while controlling. By that criteria, the stand-up was legit. By that criteria, there also should have been far more stand-ups in the Randleman match, because in the second half, Randleman was just holding him down and not doing anything on the ground working for a finish. But possibly after criticism from the previous fight, McCarthy overcompensated and only ordered 1 stand-up this entire fight, even though the guy on top was doing far less. It was after the gift stand-up in the Kosaka match that Rutten connected with the kick to the knee that changed the course of the match, which ended in a knockout by Rutten in another thriller. Of course UFC wanted Rutten to win the title. He's considered the far more charismatic of the two, and they've been building him all year, to the chagrin of every top fighter in the organization, as the greatest martial artist in the world, and he's been the focal points of just about all their advertising. They gave him that billing before he even had his first octagon match, which annoyed regular fighters who had proven themselves, most notably Frank Shamrock, who was the company's big star last year who, if anyone, had earned the title. But they also wanted Mark Coleman to beat Pedro Rizzo on the show I judged, and wanted Ken Shamrock to beat Dan Severn in Detroit in very close judges' decisions that the guy UFC wanted to win lost split decisions. I wasn't at this show or at any judges' meeting at this show and can only speak for what I know, and that is, when I judged, there was no attempt by anyone at any time to influence the decision of myself or the other two judges, and I can tell you as a fact, that had Rutten not knocked Kosaka out, there is a strong likelihood he was losing the decision. With 1 minute to go, I can tell you factually 2 of the 3 judges, if not all 3, would have voted for Kosaka. As best I can tell, and I did check around, there was nothing different done on this show. You learn around fighting and wrestling to not believe anything in life is honest, but this was simply 2 people's opinions that greatly differ from my own, which doesn't make them wrong, only having a different opinion. Fact is, there are many people I respect who know martial arts who concurred with their belief, thinking the takedowns in and of themselves don't mean anything unless they are accompanied by offense, while on top, and in that regard Randleman didn't do much after the 5 minutes mark, and Rutten did a fantastic defensive job keeping Randleman from hurting him after the initial onslaught. Rutten came in at 203 pounds, and was smaller than many of the middleweights that appear on the show, who usually actually go into the octagon at around 205 after replenishing fluids. Tito Ortiz went in as a middleweight at 217 after cutting water to 199.9 at the weigh-in the night before, apparently feeling the need for the extra conditioning as he dropped 8 pounds since the Kosaka match in January. Randleman, who was suffering from a minor bug that may have affected his stamina, was 218, and clearly did not have the stamina he had in the Maurice Smith fight, which ultimately spelled the difference. The first half of the show was terrible, among the worst ever, and because of the quick early fights, they were doing long interviews, particularly with matchmaker John Peretti, and the show without video features prepared was majorly dragging. The show was saved by 3 very good matches at the end. Rutten Randleman along with the Frank Shamrock vs. Kiyoshi Tamura, more on that one later, and Gilbert Yvel vs. Kosaka matches on the April 23rd Rings show may be the strongest candidates thus far for Shoot Match of the Year. The next show was announced for July 16th from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, headlined by Maurice Smith vs. Marco Ruiz. It wasn't announced, but it appears that Pat Miletic will defend the lightweight title against Andre Pederneiras, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu expert who beat highly regarded Ruben Asado last October. 1. Laverne Clark, 6-2, beat Fabiano Iha, 8-1, in 131 when ref Mario Yamasaki stopped the match due to blood in a lightweight match. Iha slipped trying to deliver a kick and was caught with some hard punches, which opened a cut above his nose, and it was a major head explosion bloodbath. It appeared as a viewer that Iha got Clark's leg, and Yamasaki should have at least waited to see if Clark could escape the hold, as he appeared to be in trouble, before stopping. Actually, the ref called for a stoppage due to all the blood, and Clark stopped, allowing Iha to grab the ankle. When the deep cut was examined, the match was stopped. 2. Vanderlei Silva, 10-2, beat Tony Patara, 6-1-2, in 253 via a ref stoppage in a middleweight fight. They traded attempts at knees standing. Patara rocked Silva with a punch, but in doing so left himself open for a knee to the chin that knocked him silly for the stoppage. 3. Marcelo Melo beat David Roberts in 120 of a lightweight fight. This was pretty much a massacre. Melo, 5'4" and 168, took 19-year-old Roberts down and pounded him with elbow after elbow until the ref stopped it. Very one-sided. 4. Ron Waterman, 4-0, beat 336-pound Chris Kondo in 28 seconds. Waterman, at 6'2", 259-pound former college wrestler at Northern Colorado University, looked like a smaller version of Goldberg. Kondo was a total blob and had no business out there. This was the kind of match that gives UFC a bad name. Luckily, Waterman didn't have that much of a mean streak, as he just took him down and pounded him at will before it was quickly stopped. This match had no business out there and left you with a bad taste in your mouth. 5. Pete Williams, 5-1, beat Travis Fulton, 57-14-5 in 628, a heavyweight fight. Fulton has already had 76 pro MMA fights and he's only 21 years old. He's actually a smaller guy bulked up to 226 seemingly on pizza and beer, as he's got no physique, but he's a very tough game fighter and gave Williams problems. Williams got a full mount and went with punches and elbows. He went for a heel hook but Fulton escaped and got the top position and hit Williams a lot, enough to mark his face a little, before Williams from the bottom trapped him with an armbar. Very good match. 6. Pedro Rizzo 9-0, beat Trey Teligman 9-2-1 in 4:30 via knockout in a heavyweight fight. This was a great standing fight. This is pretty much what people envision UFC as. Two kickboxers standing and going all out. Teligman was very aggressive early, connecting on some good punches, leaving Rizzo with a bloody nose. But he punched himself out and got tired. Rizzo started connecting and bloodied Teligman's nose and started nailing him with punches before decking him with a hard punch to end the fight. 7. Bas Rutten 2-0 beat Kevin Randleman 5-3 via split decision in 21 minutes to win the vacant UFC heavyweight title. Randleman took him down and hurt him early with punches from the top. Rutten got out of the bottom when the match was stopped to check the cut at 4:50. The doctor ruled Rutten had a broken nose. Boxing matches are generally not stopped due to a broken nose, so they asked Rutten if he wanted to go on. He did, and was taken down again. Rutten was at least trying submissions from the bottom. He only came close to an armbar once. When the match slowed at 10:20, there was another stand-up ordered, but Randleman took Rutten down. Rutten connected on some elbows to the top of the head from the bottom position, which opened a cut on the back of Randleman's head. In the first overtime, Randleman took Rutten down. Rutten did come close with an armbar and did a lot of punching from the bottom. In the second overtime, Randleman took Rutten down again right as Rutten nailed him with a strong kick to the liver and no doubt made his liver quiver. Randleman held him down the rest of the fight but lost the decision. There was actually an amazing amount of press regarding tying in the fact that was reported here many weeks back that WCW's Chastity, Denise Russell, once appeared in a porn movie called Live Bait for a brief cameo. The news hit TV Guide Online and Richard Johnson's page 6 column in the New York Post, with the Murdoch newspaper using it as a way to rip Ted Turner. The way the item was ordered, with the lead being that one of the female stars of Ted Turner's family-friendly World Championship Wrestling organization has an X-rated past, the word family-friendly being the key, certainly seems to indicate which direction the story was planted. Jay Leno, Craig Kilborn, and even Saturday Night Live over the weekend were doing jokes about chastity, and Hard Copy was working on a story on the subject. The WWF website had its fun using the same line, making the point of saying that its character, Val Venus, was just a guy named Sean Morley who plays the role of a porn star, forgetting the company used Jenna Jameson, a full-fledged porn star, as opposed to someone who did one oral sex in one forgettable movie, and there were reports that women that had in the past played hoes on television had also done movies of that type. Jules Jordan, who produced the movie, was quoted in several of the stories from a TV Guide Online interview saying it's amazing the story got out because she wasn't billed and there's no photo of her on the box and only appeared in one scene. Even with the pub, he said that he's not going to re-release the video and bill her as a major part of the movie. It's not unusual for someone to become a big star and then a movie they had a tiny part in years earlier gets re-released on video with them having major billing. She was slated to appear in more scenes but showed up 5 hours late for the shooting. At the Slamboree show, Eric Bischoff was telling people that what Russell did in the past was the past and he wasn't going to fire her. Japanese television rundown. April 17, New Japan. 1. Jushin Liger and Great Sasuke won the IWGP Junior Tag titles from Dr. Wagner Jr. and Kendo Kashin in 1555. The last 8 minutes aired on television. This was exactly what you'd expect from these guys except for a scary lack of crowd heat, partially because it's the Tokyo Dome. Kashin at one point did a Shattered Dreams kick to Sasuke. Kashin went to his Hurricane armbar, with the opponent sitting on the ropes, and he jumps up for the flying armbar. Sasuke did a flip dive. Liger ended up pinning Wagner after a Liger bomb, a Shota, palm, and a brainbuster off the top rope. 3.5 stars. 2. The rest of the show consisted of airing the Masahiro Chono vs Atsushi Onita match again, this time editing the match down to highlights but airing a lot of pre- and post-match interviews. April 23 rings. For whatever reason, the rules were changed again for this show, allowing 10 points before a match ended instead of 6, at least in some cases, but not in others. It's terribly confusing. The show consisted mainly of shoots, but this time they were great matches and this was probably the best show of its kind of the year. 1. Lee Hasdell beat Ryuki Wayama in 4:18 via DQ when Wayama threw a palm blow but accidentally poked Hasdell in the eye and he couldn't continue. Wayama stayed very competitive, even giving up 41 pounds to a more experienced opponent. 2. Bram Zaza beat Sandra Thornhauser in 4:02. This was a weird match and from the description would sound like a work, but viewing it looked almost surely like a shoot. Zaza continually took Thornhauser down and would get an ankle lock near the ropes and Thornhauser would grab the ropes. Zaza scored his first point with an ankle lock in 10 seconds. Second point saw him go for the ankle lock but Thornhauser did an illegal heel hook to counter and got a yellow card. Another ankle lock made it 3, 4 and 5 points and then Zaza did the same takedown and grabbed the same ankle and Thornhauser again grabbed the ropes and he was out of points. It was a really weird match. 3. Christopher Haseman beat Masayuki Naruse in 13-18 with a wristlock submission. This match looked real from start to finish. Where I think it was worked is 2 spots. One is there were a lot of points scored, and they were coming too rapidly for fighters of this skill level. Second, at one point when Naruse had him out, he pulled his trunks up like they do in pro wrestling, and that isn't something you do in the middle of a real fight. They also traded low kicks right away. Haseman was ahead 4-2 when he got the submission. 2.5 stars. 4. Yoshihisa Yamamoto beat Joop Kasteel via knockout in 7:32. This was a great ring-style worked match. They traded hard slaps and kicks standing. Kasteel was popping him hard and even got a choke to go up 4-0. Yamamoto came back with a very hard kick and Kasteel took a 9 count before getting up. Kasteel came back with a knockdown and Yamamoto made the dramatic rise at 9. It wound up with Yamamoto behind 9-4 and low on points and he threw some slaps and Kasteel went down and out, although the finish wasn't believable enough considering what they'd already done early. Still, this was a great match which says something since Kasteel is very limited. 3.5 stars. 5. Gilbert Yvel beat Tsuyoshi Kosaka in 1958 of a shoot match when it was stopped due to Kosaka having a dangerous cut over his eye. This was a super match as Yvel does so many crazy moves that he's amazing, plus, he's a great striker. Kosaka couldn't deal with him standing and the clash of style made it intriguing. The rules played a big part here since Kosaka scored 5 points fairly quick. Kosaka took him down but Yvel picked up a yellow card and for using a closed fist while on his back. Yvel scored a hard slap but was taken down and grabbed the ropes to get a stand-up making it 2-0 in the first minute. Kosaka scored 3 more rope break points to go up 5-0 at 2:42. The first key blow, which didn't even score a point, is Kosaka going for a takedown and Yvel holding the ropes to avoid going down, which is illegal, but spun his hips and hit Kosaka with a brutally hard knee to the chin which opened the first cut. Yvel was connecting on blows and Kosaka was taking him down after eating blows. This happened several times. Yvel missed a kick and then recovered and decked Kosaka with a hard palm to the side of the head at 8:15 which was the second telling blow and the knockdown was worth 2 points. Kosaka's attitude totally changed at this point as he became wary and started backpedaling more. Kosaka was still able to take him down but Yvel actually caught Kosaka in a guillotine and Kosaka had to give up a point on the ground which was amazing. At this point Kosaka was bleeding from the nose as well. Yvel hit a knee to the chin but was taken down. At this point Kosaka was starting to tire, as Yvel was able to reverse him, and he'd then let him up since standing was his world. Yvel tagged him with a left and a knee. Kosaka got him down and again was so tired he was reversed and let up. Kosaka did tag Yvel once while standing, but mostly Yvel was tagging him. At this point the eye cut got worse and even though Kosaka was still ahead on points, he was examined again and the fight was stopped. 6. Frank Shamrock and Kiyoshi Tamura went to a 1-1 draw after going the 20 minutes time limit. This was a tremendous match due to the quickness of both standing and on the mat. Shamrock got an armbar in 39 seconds but Tamura made the ropes for his point. They had some tremendous stand-up exchanges, but they were kept short because Tamura would always take Shamrock to the ground. Both had a few close calls on getting holds and both were constantly working for holds. Tamura's point came at 14:55 when Shamrock didn't have his knees on the ground when he punched him to the body and Shamrock was yellow carded. It was a foul but inadvertent and probably not worthy of a card. Tamura was on top of Shamrock for much of the rest of the match but were working for submissions until the end. April 24, New Japan. 1. Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Satoshi Kojima beat Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi in 13:55. The final 5 minutes aired on television. It was good, particularly Nagata and Kojima. Nakanishi reversed a double-team suplex and suplexed both foes at the same time. They were trying to get a facelock over as Nagata's new submission as they kept going back to it and Tenzan needing to save Kojima. Nakanishi is doing the Goldberg spear. Tenzan had Nagata pinned but Nakanishi made the save, but then Nakanishi started putting the boots to Nagata. They had been building up the split before the match but had done nothing in the match on at least the TV portion to hint it. Kojima then used a diamond cutter off the ropes on Nakanishi while Tenzan pinned Nagata after a moonsault. 3.25 stars. 2. Tatsuhiro Takaiwa beat Minoru Tanaka of the Battlers promotion in 11:52. Again, the final 5 minutes aired. Tanaka is a really good worker, maybe the best indie worker in the world right now or close to it. One of the most underrated in the world in this match showed because he held his own and made Takaiwa look good in the process. At one point Tanaka had an armbar off a triangle, but Takaiwa picked him up with the arm and put him on his shoulders for a Death Valley bomb. He also used his clotheslines, which are the best in the business. Takaiwa went for his triple bomb, but Tanaka got a heel hook off the second one and a rope break. After 2 more killer clotheslines, Takaiwa used a double bomb into a Death Valley bomb for the pin. 3.5 stars. 3. Kazuo Yamazaki and Kazuyuki Fujita beat Alexander Otsuka and Yuki Ishikawa of Battlers in another interpromotional match in 11:27. The final 6 minutes aired. Again, a good match. Fujita is built and has the same kind of look as a Japanese Kevin Randleman. At one point he dropped Ishikawa on his head off a single leg which popped the crowd big. Excellent mat work by Yamazaki and Otsuka. Fujita is a powerhouse but not very smooth. He did a power bomb off an armbar at one point. Fujita also dropped Otsuka with a sick-looking back suplex like Steve Williams' backdrop driver. Ishikawa did a heel hook on Yamazaki off a German suplex. Yamazaki was awesome carrying the match, but the finishing armbar on Ishikawa did come out of nowhere. 3 stars. 4. They replayed the Keiji Muto vs. Don Frye IWGP Heavyweight title match that already aired on the April 10th show. April 25th, All Japan. Much of the show was even more coverage of Baba's funeral. Aside from that, only one match aired. 1. Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa and Masahito Kakihara beat Jinsei Shinzaki and Akira Taue and Masao Inoue in 20:59. It wasn't anything special and pretty disappointing considering this was the Budokan Hall semi-final. Not much heat, and while everything was fine and it built well, it came off as an average match, maybe slightly better only because it was very stiff and everything looked good even if nothing was special. Kakihara ended up pinning Inoue after a Shota palm. 2.25 stars. April 29th, Dream Stage Entertainment Pride 5. This was a live pay-per-view show and again it wasn't any good. WCW wants to air the next show July 4th, on a 1-day tape delay, but there are going to have to be major changes since this show lasted more than 4 hours and there were lengthy delays and talking heads in between the matches. As mentioned before, the most significant thing about attempting to air it is if they can get it on the major cable systems like Time Warner, TCI and Cablevision, since those systems banned UFC and these matches are under almost the exact same rules, slight modifications which make for more boring matches. I suspect they'll get on because WCW is a Time Warner company and because nobody will know ahead of time what this is. But I wonder about the marquee value of seeing unknown Japanese fight each other and then ending with a work Takada vs. Ogawa main event. The new rules, where the ref can order a stand-up, ending the endless Brazilians laying on their back while the other guy is standing spots, and also rules having judges in the event matches went the time limit, made it a slightly better show, but except for the main event, which was worked, none of the matches were particularly good, although because the Japanese beat the Brazilian phenom, the semifinal was exciting for the live crowd. 1. Egan Inoue beat Minoru Toyonaga in 5:54 on a ref stoppage. Inoue got his back right away and went for a choke but Toyonaga escaped. Inoue got his back a second time but Toyonaga again escaped. Toyonaga got a bloody nose from a kick. Inoue threw a punch on the ground after a takedown and the ref stopped it. It appeared to be a quick stoppage. Toyonaga reacted to the punch but didn't seem overly stunned by it. Gary Goodridge came out for an interview and talked about his match in K1 4 days earlier and said he's fight on the July 4th Pride show. He seemed nervous doing the interview, which is surprising since talking seemed to be his strong suit in UFC. 2. Francisco Bueno beat Satoshi Honma in 4:59. Bueno had a 17-pound weight edge 222 to 205. This was a matchup of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus Karate. Honma came out to Giant Baba's ring entrance music. The match was standing and circling with few blows being thrown. Honma's low kicks bruised Bueno's thigh. They started trading punches which should have favored Honma, but Bueno rocked Honma with a punch and knocked him down and the ref stopped the fight. Honma wound up with a mouse under his left eye. 3. Igor Vovchanchyn beat Akira Shoji via decision after 20 minutes. The announced weights were 238 to 193 advantage Vovchanchyn. It didn't look to be that great of a weight difference, although Wcw is a short guy built like a tank. They were circling until Wcw hit Shoji with his first punch, putting him on the canvas at 159. Wcw, primarily a boxer, let him up and they stood and circled until clinching at 325, but Wcw broke free and threw him down, then let him up. Shoji dropped to his back with the infamous pride butt scoot, but the new rules allowed to ref to order him to stand up. Wcw connected with a few punches at 7 minutes, and late in the round Shoji threw some wild blows that whiffed. In the second round, Wcw threw him down and Shoji stayed down with a butt scoot until a stand-up. Wcw connected with a powerful punch, knocked him down, but Shoji escaped from the finish and did another butt scoot. Wcw did an accidental low kick which got him a yellow card. Wcw scored his third knockdown at 7:45 of the second round and Shoji had a mouse under his left eye which got really swollen by the finish. Wcw scored a final knockdown at the bell to win an easy decision. Kind of boring. 4. Enson Inoue beat Soichi Nishida in 25 seconds. Nishida, who weighed 317 and looked to be around 5'8", like a short young Abdullah the Butcher, or really more like Big Japan wrestler Daiko Kubo Benkei, had no business out there. Inoue decked him and Nishida was wanting out. Inoue threw a few punches, Nishida turned his back and Inoue choked him out mercifully rather than hurting the guy. Naoya Ogawa came out to the old NWA World Championship theme music that dates back to the days of Terry Funk and Harley Race, along with Alexander Otsuka and Kazunari Murakami, and talked about being on the next show. Fans popped when Ogawa gave flowers to Rickson Gracie, who came out for an exhibition of technique with Brother Royler at this point in time. 5. Kazushi Sakuraba won a decision after 20 minutes over Vitor Belfort. This was definitely a spectacle. Belfort appeared to have dropped a lot of weight, maybe too fast, as he looked drawn and his legs looked almost like twigs. He hit Sakuraba with dozens of punches early and I have no idea how Sakuraba weathered the early storm. Belfort punched himself out as he appeared blown up at the 3 minutes mark. Sakuraba took Belfort down in the guard. When Sakuraba broke free, Belfort stayed down on his back. He wouldn't get up, and Sakuraba didn't appear fazed and began kicking his thigh. He was throwing blistering kicks and the thigh bruised badly, turning purple. As the round ended, Sakuraba jumped down on him and started punching him. In the second round, Sakuraba was tagging Belfort, who had no stamina or movement. He was connecting with spin kicks to the body and leg kicks. Belfort dropped to his back and Sakuraba kept kicking his leg. The ref ordered Belfort up and Sakuraba hit him with a back kick and more leg kicks and a punch to the face, and Belfort dropped to his back again. He was ordered up and went for a takedown, but Sakuraba blocked it and he dropped to his back again. Sakuraba started punching his thigh and he was ordered to stand up. He was getting tagged and dropped to his back again. At the end, Sakuraba dove over Belfort with almost a Pero Aguayo double foot stomp at the bell. After the match, Sakuraba said that on the next show he wanted to face a tougher opponent, which shows just how little respect Belfort came out of the match with. UFC is no doubt going to now try and make its contracts even more exclusive because of the embarrassment of one of their attempted superstar creations going elsewhere and being totally exposed. 6. Nobuhiko Takada beat Mark Coleman at 11:45 in a worked match. Coleman had some heat because he hinted in Full Contact Fighter that it would be a worked match by responding when asked if it was going to be real by saying that he needed to feed his family. Because of the work rumors, Coleman was told he needed to make the match look real and to rough Takada up and go all out with body punches but not go for Takada's face hard. His face blows weren't meant to inflict damage. Takada showed up not even in shape, which made it worse. Coleman deserves a ton of credit for his performance here because it was the first worked match of his life and he had to carry things since he was doing almost all the offense and make it look both real and be entertaining. He seemingly went all out on his takedowns and threw hard body punches and even knees to the belly. He even got Takada in the headlock he beat Dan Severn with. To show just how educated the Japanese fans are, even though that was an American match, as soon as he got the hold, everyone popped because everyone knew, and when Takada escaped it was a big pop. Coleman was going for a key lock at the end of the first round. In the second round, Takada started with low kicks and Coleman began selling he was tired. Takada got the heel hook and Coleman did a pro wrestling waving off the pain before tapping spot. The place went nuts for Takada's win and they gave both fighters a standing ovation. After the match, Ogawa came in and did a pro wrestling angle laying the NWA title belt down. Takada offered his hand but Ogawa was playing pro wrestler and took his shirt off and began playing to the crowd while Takada walked off. Mexico. The El Reencuentro show on May 9th at El Toreo in Naucalpan, which was to be a 16-tria tournament, with the idea of bringing back several of the legendary trios of the early 80s when that building was the hottest pro wrestling arena in the world, fell by the wayside. The show was set for a 5:30 p.m. start, and at 5:45 p.m. promoter Juan Herrera canceled the show because less than 15 wrestlers of the 48 advertised to appear had shown up. Ovaciones reported the reason they didn't show up is that the wrestlers were afraid about the show because word had gotten out that a check to CMLL for using the company logo to promote the show had bounced. Wrestlers had asked to be paid in advance in cash, hearing about the bounce check, but nobody got any money ahead of time. There were less than 2,000 tickets sold for the show. According to the newspaper, when the announcement that the show was canceled was made, about 1,000 fans hit the ring and demanded refunds, which they never got. The promotion then tried to convince the wrestlers that did appear to put on a show and promised to pay them, but the wrestlers, seeing the unruly crowd and not trusting the promoters, left. There is some talk that the Wrestlers Union will put on a free show in the building soon so as not to leave a bad taste in the mouth of the fans in that city, because now Calpan has numerous shows every week and a lot of people will be hurt if the city is killed. Super Luchas magazine folded with the April 27th issue after slightly more than 8 years in existence. At the peak of Mexican wrestling and the Mexico economy, there were 22 weekly magazines, and now there is just Box y Lucha, and there are no known pro wrestling newsletters in Mexico, and the daily newspaper coverage of wrestling has dropped substantially as well. Great Sasuke will appear on the Return to Arena Mexico on May 21st, defending his NWA middleweight title against the winner of a one-night tournament on May 14th at Arena Coliseo, which will include Black Warrior, Ultimo Guerrero, Fuerza Guerrera, Violencia, Rey Bucanero, Tarzan Boy, Zorro, Pantera Olímpico, and Tony Rivera. The May 7th Arena Coliseo drew a weak crowd for Dr. Wagner Jr. and Scorpio Jr. and Apollo Dantes over Negro Casas and Mr. Niebla and Shocker when Shocker wouldn't help his Technico teammates. Then, as his teammates, who were getting destroyed the whole match, started their comeback, he just laid down and got pinned. Casas ended up getting DQ'd for low-kicking Scorpio. The semi saw El Satanico and Ultimo Guerrero and Zumbido over Headhunters and Brazo de Oro when Satanico pinned Oro to set up a hair versus hair match between the two on May 14th. Brazo de Oro has lost a hair match every spring or summer for the past 8 years. After Vicente Carbajal lost his payaso mask, he's now wrestling under his old name of El Indomito. Antonio Pena introduced a new fourth payaso on May 5th with pink hair called Payaso Coca Rosa. Shima Nobunaga defends the IWRG IC title against El Suicida on May 14th in Naucalpan. Torero vs. Guerrero del Futuro in a hair versus hair match headlines May 16th at Arena Coliseo. All Japan. All Japan officially had a press conference to announce Mitsuharu Misawa as the new company president on May 7th. Toshiaki Kawada and Mitsuo Momota were both named vice presidents, and the board of directors are Motoko Baba, Masanobu Fuchi, Akira Taue, Kenneth Kobashi, Yoshihiro Momota, a former wrestler with the company who is Mitsuo Momota's brother and also the son of Rikidozen, and Sachiko Baba. The major lineups were announced for the next tour. The tour opens on May 22nd at Korakuen Hall with Kobashi and Jun Akiyama and Kentaro Shiga vs. Vader and George Hines, formerly the Eagle, and Jackie Fulton, and Manukiya Mossman, Misawa and Masahito Kakihara vs. Takao Mori and Yoshihiro Takayama and Kawada and Taue and Jinsei Shinzaki vs. Johnny Ace and Bart Gunn and Wolf Hockfield. May 23rd at Korakuen Hall has Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa and Kakihara vs. Vader and Hines and Mossman, Kawada and Taue and Shinzaki vs. Omori and Takayama and Misao Inoue and Kobashi and Akiyama vs. Ace and Hockfield. May 25th in Kyoto has Kawada and Taue vs. Vader and Hockfield. Mossman and Shinzaki vs. Omori and Takayama and Misawa and Kobashi and Kakihara and Masamichi Marufuji vs. Kawada and Akiyama and Shiga and Yoshinobu Kanemaru. June 4th in Sapporo has a dream tag match with Misawa and Taue vs. Kobashi and Kawada. I think this may be the first time this match has ever taken place, but if not, it's the first time since these guys were very early in their careers. Vader and Hines vs. Ace and Gunn and Hayabusa and Shinzaki defend the All-Asian tag titles against Omori and Takayama. June 9th in Sendai as Kobashi and Akiyama defend the double tag titles against Ace and Gunn. Misawa and Shinzaki vs. Vader and Mossman and Ogawa defends the PWF Junior title against Shiga. And June 11th at Budokan Hall has Misawa vs. Kobashi for the Triple Crown, Vader vs. Gunn and Akiyama vs. Ace. In Misawa's first major act as president, he announced from this point forward all Triple Crown matches will have conclusive finishes. They haven't done DQ or cores in Triple Crown matches dating back probably about 9 years, but have done a few 60-minute draws. Misawa announced all Triple Crown matches will no longer have time limits, and after 60 minutes, they'll have a 1-minute break, and go into a sudden death overtime. When Steve Williams was in Japan, he asked Misawa about getting his job back and was told maybe. Basically All Japan filled Williams' position with Vader, and with business just so-so, it's not a definite they'd want to add Williams, who is at a high salary deal, to the company books. Williams is, as you'd expect, really upset with how the WWF deal went down. He left what was ostensibly a lifetime job with All Japan, where he got first-class accommodations everywhere paid for, when Jim Ross sold him on the idea that he'd work 10 to 15 dates per month in the US and be home to see his 6-year-old grow up and play his Little League games and such, which was a big deal to him, and not have to deal with lengthy Japanese tours anymore. He was promised a 6-month run with Steve Austin and a 3-year deal, and the Brawl for All injury knocked all plans out of the water. The only explanation he was given for being dropped is that Vince McMahon didn't think he could get over, which he felt he never got a fair shake, since he only did the Brawl for All, got hurt, and after coming back, only worked twice, a handicap match against the Hardy Boys and a hardcore match against Bob Holly. He said he was sold on doing Brawl for All, which was planned to springboard him to the top, except it was a shoot and he didn't win, because McMahon was offering a $100,000 prize to the tournament winner. He felt if he took that money and invested it, that it would pay for his son's college education in 12 years. He didn't like the idea of it being a shoot, figuring they could do a worked shoot and it would be less dangerous, although he was more concerned when it was brought up to him that it would be a shoot with hurting other wrestlers than being hurt himself. 2 Cold Scorpio is headed in later this year. Catching up on TV ratings, April 11th did a 3.2, April 18th did a 3.9. For some reason we don't have the April 25th ratings yet, and May 2nd, which was the night of the Tokyo Dome, for a show from 1:20 to 2:20 a.m. on a Sunday night, did a 4.8 rating and a 38 share. The rating peaked for the Misawa vs. Vader match, which aired in the final quarter hour, that did a 6.0 rating, which at 2:15 a.m. is closing in on a 60 share. New Japan. There continue to be a lot of hints thrown about interpromotional matches with All Japan. New Japan attempted to start it with Shinya Hashimoto working the All Japan Tokyo Dome, which would work in a sense because it would appear not to be, since Hashimoto hasn't worked for New Japan since the Dome show, but that fell through. Keiji Muto, after beating Genichiro Tenryu on May 3rd, challenged both Misawa and Kawada, and IWGP Junior Champ Koji Kanemoto has since talked of doing a match with PWF Junior Champ Yoshinari Ogawa. Meng will be coming in for the next tour, which starts May 19th, although he won't arrive until May 26th. Don Frye and Brian Johnston arrive on May 31st. There are no title matches on this upcoming tour, as the focus is on the junior heavyweights. Besides the top of the Super Junior title match on June 8th at Budokan Hall, the rest of the major matches on the show will be Keiji Muto and Satoshi Kojima vs. Masahiro Chono and Don Frye, Tatsumi Fujinami and Kazuyuki Fujita vs. Brian Johnston and Kazuo Yamazaki, Shiro Koshinaka vs. Tatsutoshi Goto and Yuji Nagata vs. Manabu Nakanishi. May 31st in Osaka has Muto and Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Kojima vs. Frye and Chono and NWO Sting. Kensuke Sasaki and Yamazaki vs. Tenryu and Koshinaka and Tadao Yasuda vs. Meng. The other major show is May 25th in Kanazawa, headlined by Fujinami and Tenryu vs. Muto and Tenzan, and June 4th in Takamatsu with Johnston and Sasaki and Yamazaki vs. Chono and Frye and NWO Sting. TV show on April 17th did a 2.0 rating, and on April 24th did add 3.7 rating. Other Japan notes. FMW, EO Ladies and All Japan Women all ran fairly major shows within about 30 minutes of each other on May 5th. FMW ran its pay-per-view show at Yokohama Bunka Gym and drew about 2,800, announced as a sellout 4,900. FMW's pay-per-view shows are shown on small direct TV of Japan as opposed to Perfect TV, which airs Pancrase, Pride, WCW and ECW, so it's much harder to get tapes since so few homes are connected. It was billed as the company's 10th anniversary show. They had a tag match underneath with Masato Tanaka and Tetsuhiro Kuroda beating Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki in 24:01 when Kuroda pinned Hayabusa, where the winner would face Koto Fuyuki for the FMW Unified title in the main event, which Fuyuki won in 21:05. They had several mixed promotion matches as well. Tsuyoshi Kikuchi of All Japan beat Koji Nakagawa in 14:42. The FMW fans were mad that an All Japan comedy match prelim wrestler be a semi-pushed FMW guy. Also, in a 10-man elimination match, the team from the Battlers promotion of Yuki Ishikawa and Daisuke Ikeda and Katsumi Yuzuta and Muhammad Yone and Takashi Hijikata beat Mr. Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya and Yukihiro Kanemura and Hideki Hasaka and Haido when it came down to Ikeda versus Ganasuke, and Ikeda won the lariat. Another All-Japan prelim wrestler, Takeshi Morishima, beat Yoshinori Sasaki in a match with little heat. The show itself lasted for around 4.5 hours and ended with what has become a new Japanese trend of throwing bottles at the ring because fans were upset at the post-match angles. Minoru Tanaka of Battlers won the FMW Junior title from Riki Fuji with an armbar as 12 minutes. From all accounts, the best match was a women's match of Gia wrestlers as Sugar Sato and Kaori Nakayama and Mayumi Ozaki representing Oz Academy beat Toshie Uematsu and Sonoko Kato and Toshio Yamada. Next FMW tour is May 21st to May 31st. They are doing a story where Tanaka and Kuroda wrestle Kanemura and Haido on every show this tour. The May 31st Korakuen Hall show will have a fans pick the rules deathmatch where fans are told to send in letters to pick the rules. Neo Ladies ran at the Kawasaki City Gym drawing an announced sellout of 2,200 for Kyoko Inoue versus Takako Inoue, which Kyoko won in 1654 with her Niagara driver. They also completed a top of the super lightweight tournament with Shaparita Asari of Neo Ladies winning the tournament over Sumi Sakai of JD. They did an angle before the main event where Takako was doing boxing training, so she used boxing punches early on to get heat. AJW drew about 1,500 to Korakuen Hall with Yumiko Hata going to a 30 minutes draw with Kaoru Ito Zappai without the mask, to set up a WWWA title match this summer. Akebono, Chad Rowan, a legendary sumo grand champion who has been injured, returned in a sumo tournament this week and started losing to lower-ranked fighters. In sumo tradition, if a grand champion starts losing to lower-ranked guys, they force him to retire because they never allow grand champions the dishonor of American boxing greats who fight past 40 and are shells of their former selves. The newspapers are already talking about Akebono for this reason having to retire, which has been rumored for some time anyway, and going into pro wrestling. There haven't been, but there will be stories about him going into WWF since the Japanese now see that as the major league of wrestling, but they are just made-up stories, the same as recent stories about WWF and K1 trading talent. Like, how can that possibly work? Atsushi Onita is promoting a show on May 13th at Korakuen Hall with a main event of himself and Samba Asako and Shigeo Okamura versus Tenryu and Shoji Nakamaki and Ichiro Yaguchi. Dr. Hannibal, Steve Gillespie, and Dr. Luther, Len St. Clair, who were FMW stars from years back, returned for this show, as does Onita's former real-life bodyguard, 54-year-old retired kickboxer Katsuji Ueda. Alexander Otskal will be going to Puerto Rico to work for Victor Quiñones' IWA WWF shows May 19th to May 21st. Why am I not surprised? Yoshiaki Yatsu will be putting on an explosive barbed wire match at the parking lot of the Seibu Dome. Tenryu is building up for a War 7th anniversary show pairing himself and Magnum Tokyo as a tag team. They are trying to hint at a Tenryu versus Goldberg singles match, but there is no chance of that happening. The May 22nd Rings show at Ariake Coliseum has Bitsaid Terriel defending their world heavyweight title against Kiyoshi Tamura and Tsuyoshi Kosaka versus Yoshihisa Yamamoto, both of what would figure to be worked matches. In what will be shoot matches, Dan Henderson, an unbeaten MMA fighter, who won an incredibly tough middleweight tournament last year on a UFC show, and a former Greco-Roman Olympic wrestler faces Hiromitsu Kanehara in a Vale Tudo rules match, and Randy Couture faces Valentijn Overeem. Henderson versus Kanehara is interesting because usually the Japanese don't like to risk their guys in a shoot against smaller Americans that have a lot of skill. It's okay to lose to big foreigners since they are bigger, and it's okay to face guys their own size or smaller that have no skill because they can beat them. Kanehara has far more submission experience than Henderson, whose amateur wrestling weight is 187, so his real weight would be about 200 and Kanehara is about 210. At this point it appears Tom Eriksson's debut with the group won't happen because they can't find anyone willing to face him. They wanted Joop Kasteel, a 265-pound powerhouse from Holland, but he wanted no part of Eriksson. A lot of the Asian women are headed to Mexico for shows on May 15th and May 16th, including a May 15th Queen of Version title match in Naucalpan with Mariko Yoshida defending against Lady Apache. Great Sasuke beat Sasuke the Great on June 9th in Iwate in a match to determine which Sasuke would go to MPW's upcoming World Masked League tournament. Here and there have been some stories on the medical condition of probably the most legendary pro wrestling announcer of the last 35 years, Gordon Solie. Sully had been working as a ring announcer for World Legion Wrestling and couldn't attend the tapings due to a polyp on his voice box. Sully decided not to get the polyp examined as to whether or not it is malignant, apparently because of how hard it was to see his wife fight and lose her life recently due to cancer. Wcw in England will be doing its second television taping on June 10th in Blackpool, England, which is actually the real hometown of Steven Regal. WNBC in New York will be doing a pro wrestling piece on its 11 p.m. news after the May 23rd airing of the Jesse Ventura movie, which airs from 9 to 11 p.m., which means it's going head-to-head with the WWF Over the Edge pay-per-view in the Eastern and Central time zones. The piece is expected to be picked up on NBC affiliates around the country. Goldberg, Raven and Chris Kanyon, under those names, although the bio of Kanyon lists his name as Chris Kluseritis and his title as consultant, coordinator and choreographer, are listed as special guest stars in the movie credits. In the bio of Ventura in the press kit, which actually was mainly accurate except for this point, they claimed Ventura retired as a wrestling commentator in 1987 to begin a career as an actor. Actually, he was fired by WWF in 1990 and worked for WCW from 1992 to 1994. Speaking of that movie, I saw an advanced copy and it was pretty bad. Nils Allen Stewart's wrestling scenes look very similar to Ventura and he has the size to play Ventura. In fact, he's bigger, but doesn't quite have the body. Wrestling plays a bigger part in the movie than I expected. Much of the wrestling stuff was really hilarious, in a bad way. The wrestling footage from the 70s, some of which was filmed at Nitro in Toronto on March 29th, included all the modern space-age moves and smaller guys than wrestled in those days, plus lots of WCW 1999 merchandise in the background and WCW logos. They showed Jesse at a match in Minneapolis, saying it was 1969. Actually, this took place many years later, watching a guy called Superstar Billy Graham who he thought was cool because he was a bad guy, and watching him made him want to be a bad guy wrestler. But there was not even a hint that Jesse patterned his entire act after Graham. For those who remembered Jesse's career, there was, in fact, no Adrian Adonis in the movie either. There was, however, a Goldberg, who fought Jesse in his very first pro match. Goldberg did the job for him as well, so if you missed the Nash match at Starrcade, I guess you can watch the movie to see that. It was clear the people who wrote the movie's knowledge of pro wrestling consisted of seeing NBC's cheesy Secrets of Pro Wrestling and Wrestling with Shadows. There was a step-by-step of Stewart as Jesse explaining all the secrets of how all the matches are called and how nobody almost ever gets hurt. That was almost right out of that special. In the movie, Jesse suffered his blood clot in the ring during a match. Kanyon, who did all kinds of cool moves throughout the movie, both as himself and also as Dr. Death, wearing his old Mortis gimmick, and was told he could never wrestle again. Of course, he actually wrestled for about 18 months more. They had this tiny sleazy-looking guy play Vince McMahon. There was a scene where a guy took this piledriver off the ropes and they feared he broke his neck, but it was only a broken collarbone. The Vince guy was laughing in the dressing room at the idea that for the first time somebody actually got hurt in a wrestling match. The Jesse character at this point wanted to form a union. Anyway, after his wrestling career was over, he became a heel commentator with a fat guy who looked a little like Rob Reiner, who was called All Things Gorilla, although they still had WCW banners at the announcing table. If Jesse was as bad an announcer as Nils was playing him, he'd have been out of there faster than you can say Angelo King Kong Mosca. You're going to either laugh or get violently ill when you hear how Jesse's career as an announcer ended. See, wrestling was changing and he didn't like it. Fans were cheering the bad guys and getting more violent. They didn't like heroes anymore and were losing their values, and it was getting to be no fun. One time Jesse got hit with a chair trying to break up a fight because fans were so out of control. Then, there was this guy who had a great career and his final match was in his hometown in front of his family and his friends, and the evil Vince guy wanted him to lose to a new guy he was pushing, given the ring name of Raven. Played by Scott Levy, of course. He was really sad because he was supposed to lose. Jesse asked why, being that the guy had never had any problems losing before and it's all fake anyway. The guy said it was his last night and all his friends and family were there and started talking about his 18 years and just wanting to go out in his hometown with some dignity. The guy didn't do it very well, but Jesse was still moved. So Jesse went to the evil promoter and felt for the guy, and the promoter said no way is Raven going to lose. When the promoter asked Jesse why he should change the finish, Jesse said the guy had given all those years of service and it was his last night in his hometown and it would be the right thing to do, and about this time I was getting really ill. So they agreed to a schmaz, a disqualification. Anyway, Jesse is doing commentary and cheering for the babyface, and Gorilla was confused as to why, but Jesse was clearly not very happy about what the wrestling business was becoming. This evil Vince dude was at ringside. Now why the hell was he at ringside? You don't figure. Raven put the guy in, oh my god, a sharpshooter, and the promoter screamed at the timekeeper, ring the bell, ring the fucking bell. The poor guy just disappeared. The least they could have done was let him spit one giant loogie at the promoter's face. It gets better. Jesse goes backstage pissed, but the rat has locked himself in the office. But unlike real life, Jesse ripped the door from the hinges. We hear a punch, we don't get to see it this time either. And it's made clear that this has left such a bad taste in Jesse's mouth that he quit the wrestling business for good to become an actor. The portrayal of him as a politician and a talk show host was positively folklorish. The only scene of the movie that was gripping was when Jesse's father died and he found out his father saved all his wrestling magazine stories, so he was really proud of him. Stewart really failed in showing the charisma and talking ability that was Ventura's calling card, and he came off more like Goldberg with a worse body trying to run for student body president than governor of Minnesota. Poor Skip Humphrey's portrayal was really out of it. Even Skip's own kid thought Jesse was the coolest. In Memphis on the May 8th TV show Sola Fatu debuted as a street hustler J.R. Smooth. He won the PPW title from Michael Hayes with the old Samoan drop after interference from Glenn Kulka. This will set up a tag team feud with Hayes bringing back Terry Gordy as his partner. They did an angle where ancient wrestler Buddy Wayne's son Aubrey Wayne, a ref, was attacked by Mike Tierney and Buddy punched him. Vicky Grimes did an interview saying he was tired of Southern-style wrestling and getting no respect and said he was a hardcore wrestler from California and started hitting his head with a chair. Nicole Bass is coming in to work with 5'6", 160-pound male wrestler Derek King. Tierney challenged Wayne to a match, but Wayne, who is about 65, refused, saying he wasn't crazy. Kevin Lawler, came out and said all the fans were tired of Randy Hales and Dave Brown. They had an 8-man elimination match for the vacant Young Guns title won by Kid Wicked. It now appears those lucha shows listed last week in Dallas and Chicago won't be taking place. The Chicago show on May 15th is definitely off and is said to be moved to Houston, although if you call the buildings, they claim there are no shows booked. Jacques Rougeau's second Montreal show at the Pierre Charbonneau Center on May 7th drew an estimated 1,800, which was headlined by Jacques and Raymond teaming together, losing via DQ to Abdullah the Butcher and Ron Garvin. The match ended when Jacques Sr. attacked special ref Michel Dubois, Alexis Smirnoff. The two feuded in Montreal over the world title in the early 70s. Match was a bloodbath. They opened the show with a video tribute to Jos Leduc. They're back on August 9th with King Kong Bundy and Rojo Brothers vs. Garvin and Abdullah and Richard Charlon. Independent Northern Championship Wrestling out of Montreal in getting a lot of mainstream pub. First there was a story in the Montreal Gazette, followed by a story in the Canadian National Post, and now CBC's The Magazine is working on a 20-minute piece on the guys training and working. A group called West End Sports ran its annual show in New Rochelle, New York on May 8th, drawing 2,600 fans featuring Jake Roberts, the Bushwhackers, Pit Bulls and Tom Brandy as the biggest names. The spring 1999 issue of Real Judo has a story on the career of Alan Coage. Bad News Alan, who had his final match at the age of 56 on May 10th in Regina, Saskatchewan. Coage will be having both knees replaced this week. The surgeon suggested doing one now and the second in 6 months, but he opted for getting the whole procedure over with as quickly as possible. In his final match, he beat Jackal in a street fight match before about 250 fans. Jackal put Bad News over big on the mic after the match. Bad News then told the crowd this would be his final match. This was not advertised ahead of time as his last match, but it was fairly well known in some circles that it would be for a few weeks, and everyone on the show came into the ring to shake his hand. They did an angle at the end where heels Great Gama and Jerry Morrow destroyed him with chair shots. Coage was a legend in judo long before starting his 22-year pro wrestling career in 1977 for New Japan Pro Wrestling, using his judo medal as a springboard to being pushed. As noted many times, he was only the second American in history to medal in judo in the Olympics when he captured a bronze medal in 1976. His quarterfinal opponent, Austrian Klaus Wallace, also later became a pro wrestler for Otto Wanz in Europe. As a heavyweight, Coage won the U.S. National Championship in 1966, 1968, 1969, 1970 and 1975, gold medals in the 1967 and 1975 Pan American Games, and represented the U.S. in 4 World Championships, with his best finish of 4th place in 1971. Coage was a legendary tough guy in pro wrestling, with his greatest success coming with New Japan and in this continent, during a long run in the early 80s as the lead heel for Stampede Wrestling, battling the likes of Dynamite Kid, Davey Boy Smith, Bret and Owen Hart among others, and later as Bad News Brown for the WWF. The WWF wanted to trademark Bad News Allen and he refused to let them, hence the Brown name. He currently lives in Calgary and has 9 children and 14 grandchildren. June 2nd in Conyers, Georgia. Besides Naoya Ogawa vs. Gary Steele for the NWA title, we'll have Colorado Kid vs. Jerry Lawler, Bob Armstrong vs. Iron Sheik and Stephen Dunn, and Reno Riggins vs. Shane Helms and Shannon Moore. Independent Wrestling Federation on June 22nd in South Plainfield, New Jersey at Grand Slam USA has Tommy Dreamer vs. Steve Corino. Terry Funk made his final appearance in his old stomping grounds of Lubbock, Texas, where he wrestled most Wednesday nights from much of the late 60s and early 70s and probably hasn't wrestled in the city in nearly 20 years, wrestling Greg Valentine for Bad Boys of Wrestling, which drew only 390 fans. Funk before the match gave a goodbye speech to the fans talking about wrestlers like Wahoo McDaniel, Sputnik Monroe, Ricky Romero, Killer Carl Cox, and talked about matches in Lubbock between his father and the Sheik, his own chain match against Harley Race, and the night Mike DiBiase, Ted's stepfather, died in the Lubbock Coliseum in the match against Man Mountain Mike. He said he was only going to wrestle a few more matches in the US before retiring, but said he would probably always return to Japan on occasion. NWA Southwest is running its biggest show in its history on June 10th at the Bronco Bowl in Dallas, with Eric Spraxia and Knuckles Nelson coming in to defend the NWA tag titles against Team Extreme, plus Colorado Kid, Stephen Dunn, Terry Gordy, and Reno Riggins will appear. Over the Top Rope Promotions on May 21st in Marlboro, New Jersey at Monmouth Grand Slam has Pit Bulls, Tommy Cairo, and more. All Pro Wrestling has shows on May 21st in Hayward, California at Tennyson High and May 22nd in San Jose at Silver Creek High. Independent wrestler Mad Dog DeMarco, James DeMarchi in Ontario, is actually the middle-aged brother of 60s and 70s star Paul DeMarco. MMA. There was apparently a meeting at UFC of not wanting its fighters to fight elsewhere because of what happened with Shamrock, its middleweight champ, going to the draw in Belfort, who they were grooming for a match with Shamrock, losing so badly, and Pat Miletic, the lightweight champ, being tapped out in Hawaii. There is a holdup in Shamrock signing the contract because Semaphore Entertainment Group offered him for the Tito Ortiz match in September because it's an exclusive deal to Semaphore Entertainment Group, meaning he couldn't fight for any other organization, which would lock him out of the Japanese market. TSN did a very fair piece on UFC, concentrating on the plight of Gary Goodridge, on the show Sports Desk Extra on May 2nd. The piece talked about the background of UFC and filming at the previous show, talking about its high point and its current low point, and acting like the company is trying to rebuild around Boss Rutan. It said that Goodridge earned $10,000 for his last UFC fight and $20,000 for his April 25th K1 fight. There is a snag when it comes to the July 4th Pride show in regard to the Nobuhiko Tada vs. Naoya Ogawa main event. Apparently the Takada people are balking about doing the job, and it may wind up with each of them in separate singles matches, which would make it far harder to draw. You know what would be hilarious? If this show does air on pay-per-view in the US and Ogawa comes out with the NWA belt on a show produced by WCW, and the how that, and Ogawa and Takada's backgrounds as pro wrestlers will be addressed. But see the April 25th K1 show, and it was one of the better shows of the year. With the exception of the Gary Goodridge low blow ending the match in the first minute, every match was great. After the UFC, at one of numerous post-show parties in the hotel, Marco Ruas and Pedro Rizzo were apparently being bad-mouthed by Marco Albuquerque, a Brazilian that hangs around in UFC circles and has been in people's corners in the past. One thing led to another, and a fight broke out, and word has it that Ruas lived up to his King of the Streets nickname on this occasion. The Orange County Register on May 5th ran a lead story on Underground shows John LeBay is promoting at a Huntington Beach bar. The story tried to link his shows, UFC shoot fighting, submission fighting, and NHB as all the same thing, claiming that all are banned by law by the California State Athletic Commission. It was a terribly negative story. Of course, LeBay's shows are illegal, but they are still held for videotape purposes, and the police and commission know about them but didn't stop the show. The story noted the police showed up and chose not to stop the show because they were outnumbered, given the neighborhood, and that a lot of the fans stopped at the liquor store first, and shutting the show down would be like dropping a lit match into a gas tank. The commission claims that it will take someone getting killed at a show before the commission is actually given power to shut these shows down. The newspaper ripped on the show, noting one of the sponsors, a local sex shop, gave the ring announcer X-rated videos to throw into the crowd. ECW. The status of Shane Douglas is the big story this week. Douglas was negotiating last week with the WWF. Last word we had, which was just before the weekend, was that WWF hadn't decided on him for a number of reasons, largely his frequent injuries, but the impression I was given was they were leaning toward bringing him in and planning on him getting a significant push, and the idea of him working with Austin, as silly as that sounds now, is being bandied about. Douglas can talk, which is important, but his physical condition is questionable at best and his work hasn't been good in a long time due to the injuries. He's over in ECW because he's been pushed as a top guy for years and is taken by the fans as almost a local legend, but it's going to be a lot harder starting from scratch in WWF without being able to do much inside the ring. There was tremendous heat from Douglas flopping as Dean Douglas a few years back in WWF, but both sides are willing to put the blame at the hands of Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall for not letting him get over, so they can both go in with the attitude that WWF didn't screw him and try to starve him as he'd claimed for years and that he didn't flop on his own. He's dropped 25 pounds for his peak of being out of shape but is still around 240, which is too heavy for his frame. He was in Philadelphia on May 8th to do an autograph session and was told that he wasn't supposed to appear on the ECW Arena show or even come, which shows how heated things have come between he and Paul Heyman. The plan was for him to work with Justin Credible at the pay-per-view show and put Credible over, and that would probably be his last night with the company, but the last word we got was that his even appearing on the show wasn't certain. New Jack also wasn't in due to a leg injury. Inside Edition came to the ECW Arena show as they are doing a segment on the New Jack trial for assault on Eric Kulas for the in-ring incident, which is coming up in a few weeks. All the wrestlers were warned not to let the cameras film them. Sabu also wasn't in, as he didn't arrive back from Japan in time for the show, but will be at the pay-per-view. Told the May 8th Arena show, which drew the usual sellout of about 1,400, was really just like a regular house show with a few angles thrown in. Takamichi Noku, who was bothered by a bad knee suffered while in Japan, teamed with Yoshihiro Tajiri against Super Crazy and Nova. Nova was taken out early and replaced by Spike Dudley, and they had a good match with the Japanese team going over. Taka and Tajiri were said to have a lot of charisma together. Chris Candido versus Chris Chetti died live as Candido and Tammy Sitch are no longer over. They did a deal playing off Chetti's legit injury from a few weeks back where he was supposedly injured, and they ended the match and carried him off. Fans didn't buy it again. After the matches they were carrying him out, Candido first apologized, but then attacked him on the stretcher. Taz, who is legitimately Chetti's cousin, then attacked Candido, and then attacked Chetti on the stretcher as well, saying if he'd do that to Chetti, who is family, imagine what he'd do to Candido, who he hates, on the pay-per-view. Axel Rotten vs. Steve Corino ended with the Dudleys attacking Rotten, turning it into a tag match with Axel and Balls Mahoney against the Dudleys. Match was a good brawl until a spot where they were supposed to wrap Rotten in barbed wire, but the wire got tangled and it took forever to wrap him up. Also, the fireball that Mahoney threw at one of the Dudleys, who moved, was supposed to hit Rotten for an injury angle, but it missed him, but he sold it like he was injured anyway. No word on whether Rotten will appear selling the injury on the pay-per-view or this angle was done to change the originally scheduled match, because it's no secret Rotten may be on the way out. Rob Van Dam beat Skull Von Crush in the TV title match, said to be okay. Von Crush is expected to be repackaged as a babyface with a new name. Main was Tommy Dreamer and Jerry Lynn and Francine over Justin Credible and Lance Storm and New Beulah. The other show of the week was May 7th in York, Pennsylvania, which drew about 800 fans, with Van Dam over Mahoney on top. Taz's wife had the baby boy this past week. TV this week opened with Cyrus Don Callis interviewing Steve Corino on the beach and telling him he had heat with Taz and he played chicken shit, Hill claiming to have ruptured both of his appendixes. He said the angle was all Candido's fault. Taz then put Jeff Jones in the trunk of his car and beat up ring crew member Bill Wilds before the show started. They aired Van Dam over Bubba Ray Dudley from Queens in a decent match, with Van Dam whining with a Van Daminator and frog splash in about 10 minutes. The match ended with the dressing rooms emptying and everyone brawling. During the match itself, the fake crowd noise piped in was so obvious that it was a lot worse than the lack of heat the match was getting live. At one point it was so bad that a bell rang on the tape of the crowd noise. The other match was Lynn beating Credible from Fort Lauderdale in 10 minutes of another 3.5 stars match, which Lynn seems to have every week on TV now. I really liked how Joey Styles brought up, and the wrestlers themselves brought up, their feud from the past to give this cold match a story. It's the exact opposite of WCW and everything, where they can put, say, Mysterio Jr. in with Eddie Guerrero and nobody will ever acknowledge their match in Las Vegas or their feuds or their past together, so the match is cold and nobody has a reason to care about two guys doing great moves back and forth. Credible brought up never getting a shot at Van Dam. Credible still comes across on his own as a mid-carder due to the way he delivers his interviews, even though he bumps great and has been pushed hard. Very hard work, and Credible took great bumps. The crowd took it as a mid-card match since when they were wrestling, the crowd was chanting table as they wanted to see them break the table rather than cared who won the match. Jason, coming off a broken neck, took a reverse DDT from Lynn near the finish, which Lynn won with his cradle piledriver. Big time run-in at the end with Dreamer trying to piledrive whatever name Dawn Marie is going by, but Storm saved him while the crowd chanted "Show your tits." For some reason, "We Want Puppies" comes off so much better even though it's the same thing. WCW. Latest regarding Davey Boy Smith and Rick Rude. Smith is now able to move around somewhat and even leave the house. He's wearing a full body cast and is talking about being able to wrestle and doing so in the WWF as he's been in contact with Vince McMahon. Even though he was sent a termination notice by WCW is continuing to pay him and the checks indicate they will continue coming. Speaking of Smith, a correction from the April 26th issue. When Smith brought his way out of his WWF contract to join WCW, McMahon asked for $150,000 to let him out of the contract. The two sides settled for $100,000. Where it said he and WWF split paying it off, obviously that was meant to read WCW. Despite reports everywhere to the contrary, there is no indication what if anything WCW will do in regard to what was left on Rude's contract. Michelle Rude hasn't received anything from WCW and Bischoff has been non-committal with her about anything financially that the company is going to do. Rude's technical cause of death was complications from an enlarged heart, which is the technical cause of death of both Brian Pillman and Louis Spicolli as well. There is no indication one way or the other whether Rude was taking HGH, which can enlarge internal organs like the heart. The DEA has seized all medical records of Dr. Edmund Chen in Palm Springs, California, who was tied in the ESPN piece of supplying Pillman with the HGH that he took until shortly before his death, and Melanie Pillman King has talked of filing a lawsuit against Chen since prescribing and dispensing HGH to athletes for reasons other than the treatment of disease is illegal. Perry Saturn had fluid injected in his L4 disc this past week, which was almost all dried out. His back had been in worse and worse pain progressively as time had went on, stemming from an injury last fall taking a bump on the trapdoor. It had gotten so bad that he had to have other wrestlers or friends carry his bags through airports, and it hurt just to walk. He had been hospitalized 3 times over the past week or two and had been heavy into painkillers and was scared off them because of the death of Rude. He was taken off house show for 3 weeks, but due to winning the tag titles, he worked the pay-per-view and will probably work Nitros. Add Goldberg to the list of very unhappy campers, and boy have there been a lot of those of late. Goldberg, who has several years left on his contract, which I believe is at $800,000 per, attempted to renegotiate it upwards since he's the company's biggest current media star but is far below the likes of Hogan, Hart, Nash, Hall, Savage, Sting and Page, all at $1.5 million per and up, and feels he should be at their level, and Bischoff hasn't been accommodating. First day advances for Nitros on May 31st at the Astrodome and July 5th at the Georgia Dome were in the 8,000 range, or about half of what they were the last time WCW played those buildings. The Calgary Hitmen hockey team in the Western Hockey League, named after Bret Hart's nickname, won the league championship this past week. Names like Sid and Yokozuna have been brought up to bring in. Yokozuna wouldn't be legal to wrestle in any commissioned state due to failing his physical in New York. No truth to any of the recent talk about WWF considering bringing Sid back. Chris Jericho wrote on his website that he's made up his mind about his future but wouldn't say what that decision was, but everyone in WCW is under the assumption it is WWF. The reason the Page-Flair match in Charlotte wasn't as good as Page's matches the previous weeks with Goldberg and Sting was because Page and Flair come from different schools. Page is heavily criticized by many for an inability to ad-lib. He books every match down move for move. Flair comes from the era where a great worker goes into the ring knowing little more than the finish, and they call spots based on how the crowd is reacting. Flair wouldn't memorize a move-for-move match, and it wasn't that good. At a Jersey All-Pro Wrestling autograph show on August 29th in Secaucus, New Jersey at the Holiday Inn Crowne Plaza, they are going to reunite the original 4 Horsemen: Flair, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, and Tully Blanchard. There had been talk of Hall doing a run-in to help Flair beat Piper on the pay-per-view and joining the Horsemen. I don't know, this wasn't anything more than a planted story because I was given the impression Hall, Nash, Conan and Mysterio Jr. would somehow be linked together in a group. Whether it was or wasn't, Hall showed up in St. Louis and apparently this past week got back with his wife, who doesn't want him wrestling, and asked to take time off until the fall to save his marriage and his personal life, so whatever he was going to do originally was pulled from the show. Medusa and Johnny Boone were also involved in training Gorgeous George. Apparently WCW signed Piper to a 3-year contract. Bischoff was telling people at the pay-per-view that the NBC deal from a few months back was screwed up by TBS execs, and then when the basketball strike ended, NBC changed its mind about the deal. That could also be a face-saving story because many people feel the deal was never solid to begin with, although negotiations were definitely serious at one point. The Outside the Lines segment on Pro Wrestling was the highest-rated segment in the history of that show and was replayed more often because ESPN replayed the part about the deaths of wrestlers on its newscast all day long after Rude died than any other episode of that show, which has been around for years. WCW is taking its newsstand magazine in-house. The Charlotte Observer ran a huge front-page story on May 9th on Ric Flair. The story, which was well-written, focused on his sadness at the failing health of his parents. His mother has suffered 2 strokes over the past 10 weeks and his father's health has been getting worse as well. It talked about his kids growing up and that his oldest daughter, Megan, 25, is about to get married. It was a totally positive story on Flair as a person, actually underplayed his status in wrestling, portraying him more like a local guy who is one of wrestling's biggest stars and not giving him the credit as being in many people's eyes the best performer ever. His career was talked about more running down his angles over the past year, which when you read about them in a newspaper sound even stupider than they were watching them on television, and really not getting into anything else. It also acted as if his heart attack angle was a real-life muscle spasm as opposed to a complete work. If you're wondering what if any disciplinary action or if anything was even said to Juventud Guerrera and Jerry Flynn about their DUI arrests, the answer is nothing. David Letterman's top 10 list on May 4th was of slogans for the new WCW Nitro Cologne. 10, finally, 9. Because when you're sitting on your ass all day watching wrestling, you've got to smell your best. 8. This stuff can make you governor. 7. Give a bottle to that Nancy boy son of yours. It couldn't hurt. 6. The perfect gift for. It's really hard to say. 5. If you actually bought Michael Jordan's cologne, you might as well buy this. 4. The exciting scent of the lowest common denominator. 3. Like a pile driver up your nose. 2. Sometimes you just want to smell phony. And 1. Attract them white trash babes. Aside from the pay-per-view, there were no shows this past week. From the WCW Saturday night tapings on May 11th, in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, very little of significance. They are doing a gimmick where David Flair wrestles and Charles Robinson is the ref. Flair's opponent in both matches immediately touches David and Robinson stops the match and rules Flair the winner via DQ, so I guess now Rick and David are friends again. Juventud Guerrera beat Jerry Flynn in a DUI on a pole match. The title match on the show saw Hugh Morris and Barbarian over Raven and Saturn via DQ when Canyon interfered. WWF. This week's incarnation of the Over the Edge pay-per-view on May 23rd in Kansas City is Austin vs. Undertaker with both Vince and Shane as referees, Rock vs. Triple H, an 8-man elimination match with Big Show and Shamrock and Test, and Mankind vs. Mideon, New Spelling, and Viscera and Farouk and Bradshaw. Road Dogg vs. Billy Gunn, X-Pac and Kane defending the tag titles against D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry, El Snow vs. Holly for the hardcore title, Val Venus and Nicole Bass vs. Jeff Jarrett and Deborah. Originally the women involved were to be Sable and Ivory, which I guess shows Sable not wanting to wrestle, which explains the title switch, and Godfather vs. Owen Hart, not Blue Blazer, for the IC title. Raw taping on May 10th in Orlando, Florida drew a sellout of 12,213, paying $306,455. At press time, including the May 11th taping in Fort Lauderdale, the WWF has sold out 8 consecutive shows. Show opened with Kane and Billy Gunn having one of those sports entertainment matches. You know, the kind that is neither sport nor entertaining nor ever ends. A plant, a local DJ, attacked Billy as he was going to the ring. He should be called Mr. Tan and not Mr. Ass. Certainly this wouldn't be called Mr. Match. Gunn sold a foot to the face that missed worse than the moves in the Con and Stevie Ray match. Kane did do the first thing that required skill in his WWF tenure as he took a bump outside the ring and caught his ankle in the ropes. While he was hanging there and getting pounded, Road Dogg and X-Pac ran in for the save. Dogg threw Billy over the barricade and Billy had to leapfrog a photographer who was in the way to do the move. Brown and Henry attacked X-Pac and Kane while Billy ended up beating on Dogg. Monica Seles was watching. Vince came out leading the Union to battle, which has its ironies. Vince challenged Shane to come out. Shane and the CM came out. The lights went out while Shawn Michaels read the card. Shawn was in the ring in Police Riot Squad gear at the same time when he announced himself as ref for the main event. Big Show vs. Paul Bearer was another sports entertainment match. There was a choke slam and an elbow drop and Show challenged Undertaker. He came out but the CM attacked White and the Union made the save with 2x4s. Debra vs. Sable in an evening gown match saw Venus come out and distract Debra so Sable could tear her dress off. Lawler made a comment about how great her dress would look on the floor beside his bed. Michaels indicated it had already been there beside his. Nicole Bass chased Venus away and Jarrett hit him with the guitar. Michaels then said as far as he's concerned, the one who loses their clothes is the winner, so he awarded the match and the women's title to Debra. Believe it or not, they'd had problems getting Sable to do a job and give up the belt. I know that sounds stupid, but wrestling often is. Anyway, I guess this was the compromise, because unlike Wendy Richter and that other situation that we talk about every week, they don't want her to quit and she's making so much money I don't think she wants to walk away either. In a night stick on a pole match, Bossman beat Test in 7:02, which was the first match on the show with an actual finish. Test got the stick but Bossman had hidden another one and used it. The fans didn't give a rat's ass about this match. They only wanted to be seen on TV. This match was impossible to pay attention to because the crowd standing up and holding their signs in unison in the section every time there was a camera switch, and sitting down when the camera wasn't on them, became the whole effing show. That's also why the match had no heat. Luckily there was no nitro because this was a channel switching segment. Cactus Jack, as Cactus Jack, beat Midian and Viscera in a hardcore handicap match in 4:35 when he hit Viscera with a chair on the floor off the apron for the pin. It wasn't good as Jack's mobility is way down because of his knee problems, but Jack can do no wrong these days. He came to the ring with basketballs and hit Midian with one of them. Bruce Pritchard, who has lost weight, was on camera running out there retrieving the ball so intently like some in the mob had hidden a stolen diamond in, and it was about to go into the crowd. Chyna said she was on her period. Isn't that stealing the gimmick of Jacqueline and Terry? Men all over America then had to wonder if a woman on steroids actually gets a period. Which leads to the second question, if a woman with gigantic implants can breastfeed. They showed a Steve Blackman video. The idea is he's coming back as a heel. Bradshaw vs. Farouk in a lumberjack match with the Union as lumberjacks went 3 minutes before another sports entertainment finish where they just stopped fighting. The CM came out to attack the Union but the Union chased them off except for Viscera, who was too fat and slow to move out of there. So he was hit with the lamest 2x4 shots you'll ever see. Patterson and Briscoe came out talking about who they've beaten in the past. Patterson mentioned he beat Ray Steven, which brought back memories of everyone's childhood in San Francisco. Patterson, who was a great interview even though he could barely read English, always mixed up last names. Roy Shire was always Roy Shires and Ray Stevens was always Ray Steven, and I heard him blow those names every Saturday for years. Patterson and Gerald Briscoe beat Pete Gas and Rodney in 2:13 of a loser leaves the WWF match. Patterson and Briscoe came out to Hogan's Real American Music and were cupping their ear and posing. This scene was a total riot. This was the best thing on Raw in months. They just mocked Hogan. Briscoe, 52, is really pretty bad in the ring, but Patterson, 61, no matter how sleazy he may be in real life, will be one of the best workers in the business 5 years after he's dead. Rodney didn't want to take Patterson dropping his crotch on the top rope. Anyway, Briscoe used the figure 4 on 1 and Patterson put the Boston Crab on the untalented one. I know, both have no talent. They played Hogan's music and Patterson took off his shirt and began posing. This was a riot. Jim Ross finished the segment by saying, "And fellas, he's single." They then aired a commercial on My Cable Company for UFC 20 featuring Boss Rudin versus Kevin Randleman. The problems were twofold. First, the commercial had no date on it. The show had already taken place 3 days earlier. And most importantly, but effing Cable Company doesn't carry the thing in the first place. Jarrett beat Venus in 8 minutes of We Want Puppies chants. Venus was about to win when Debra took her blouse off. Venus decided against winning the match and actually thought he was going to be able to have sex with Debra right there in front of 12,000 people. I'm sorry, but nobody that stupid should be a babyface. When Jarrett saw what was happening, Debra slapped Venus and Jarrett hit him with the women's title belt for the pin. Next was supposed to be Ken Shamrock versus Chyna. Shamrock said he was raised to never hit a woman. That's all well and good, but what does that have to do with that testosterone-filled beast he was supposed to wrestle? He was probably raised to never sleep with his sister, and what kind of preparation was that for the real world of the WWF? Chyna slapped him and forearmed him and Shamrock went crazy and gave her a belly-to-belly and stormed off and left. Finally Vince and Rock and Austin beat Triple H and Undertaker and Shane in 4:35. Rock had a cast on his left arm and clearly very limited in what he could do. The confusing thing about all this is that if you watch the tape of his bump, he fell on the right side of his body. He also wrestled all weekend without a cast, but showed up on TV Sunday with one. WWF on its website told fans for Heat in Jacksonville to bring slings as Rock broke his arm. Nobody did, and on Raw they really played down the idea of a broken arm. Vince was laid out immediately by a tombstone piledriver from Undertaker so he didn't have to wrestle. Rock KO'd Shane with a cast so he didn't have to either. Austin ended up stunning Shane and Vince went to cover him, but Austin threw Vince off, gave Shane another stunner and pinned him himself. May 11th TV taping in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at the NCR Center. Dan Marino was at the show. Kurt Angle beat Barry Houston in a dark match. Locals Jimmy Vipers beat Bruno Saucy. For Heat on May 16th, it opened with X-Pac over Brown via DQ when Ivory interfered. The CM did an interview where Shane said Rock can't use the cast against Triple H on the pay-per-view. They announced Rock vs. Undertaker and Triple H vs. Austin on Raw the next day. Gangrel and Edge beat Droz and Albert when Ryan Shamrock distracted Albert. Droz and Big Al chased Shamrock but she was saved by PMS and Meat so she's now in PMS. Doak Hendricks interviewed the Brood. The lights went out like there was going to be another bloodbath, but this time the Hardy Boys came out in new outfits and when the lights came on, the Brood was covered in the red stuff. Road Dogg beat Holly in 56 seconds on a hardcore classic when Snow distracted Holly. Holly attacked Snow and destroyed the deer head, which was called Pierre, and they made a lot of inside jokes about the deer head only having one eye. Snow cried in the ring. Lawler interviewed Venus who challenged Jarrett and Deborah to a mixed tag and brought out Bass as his partner, and they shook hands. Kane no contest Henry when Brown and X-Pac ran in and they brawled again. Show and Shamrock and Test and Mankind beat Too Much and DOA in 19 seconds when Show choked Slam Skull. Brown and Henry got on the mic and challenged X-Pac and Kane to come out and they had another brawl very similar to the previous one. It appeared to be a way to splice this brawl into the other spot because something went wrong the first time. Raw had Godfather and Venus over Jarrett and Blue Blazer when Bass distracted Blazer and Jarrett and Godfather used the DVD on Blazer. Brown and Henry and Gunn no contest Dog and Kane and X-Pac in 6:56. CM interview where Shane said they'd get Vince. The Union hadn't shown up so Vince, Briscoe and Patterson looked worried and tried to leave but were locked in. Undertaker and Triple H destroyed Vince who later in the show went out in an ambulance. Test beat Meat via DQ in 6:38 when Jacqueline dropkicked Test off the top rope. Tori came out to join PMS, but she suckered them by turning on all of them. CM challenged Austin. Shamrock came out and was choking out Shane when the CM destroyed him but the rest of the Union made the save. Austin took Paul Bearer hostage and gave him a stunner. Taker beat Rock in a casket match when Triple H interfered and when Rock was in a casket, Triple H destroyed it with a sledgehammer. Brood double count out with Hendricks and Hardy Boys in a brawl all over the place. Snow had a funeral for Pierre where he was crying and there were a lot more inside jokes. Holly tried to break up the funeral but Snow gave him the snow plow. Austin no contest Triple H in 14:36 of the main event. They brawled all over the place under Undertaker's cross, symbol, came out. Taker attacked Austin to crucify him. The Union made the save and with everyone brawling to the back, there was only Austin and Undertaker and Austin tied Undertaker to the symbol and crucified him as the show went off the air. The May 6th Richmond, Virginia Times-Dispatch had a front page of the entertainment section cover story on Earl and Dave Heckner talking about their background starting out working for the Crockett's for $15 a night and claimed both make well into the mid-six figures in the WWF. There was a second story inside about you know what. Earl's comments regarding the match. It was the most difficult situation I have ever been in this business. It was something I did because I was told to do it. I basically did it to protect the business for the rest of the boys. Here is one guy who was going to screw up 150 guys' lifestyle. Somebody explained that one to me the guy already had a $9 million contract. What was the big deal? If you work for somebody and you don't do what they tell you to, they don't need you. When asked about Heckner swearing on his kid's life to heart that he wouldn't let anything fishy happen, Heckner admitted doing so and claims he kept his word. I said I would never count him out, and I didn't. Brett and I were real close, but Brett didn't offer me any money. He didn't say you do this, I will give you this. I have a family that I have to take care of. WWF The Music fell to number 57 this week with 25,208 sales. On April 9th in the UK, Raw had 270,000 viewers to Nitro's 210,000. Entertainment Weekly published McMahon's letter saying that they put Goldberg on the cover instead of Austin because they were owned by the same parent company as WCW and ripped the mag for keeping that info from its readers. The editors responded that Goldberg got the cover because his photo was considered better, and showed a proof of a potential cover that was voted down with Austin. It isn't definite according to the WWF office, but the word we get is Mick Foley will have both his knees scoped after this pay-per-view or maybe in early June and clean up cartilage damage, but he doesn't have any ligament damage. He's expected out probably through mid-July. Robbie Dix, who wrestled in college at Fresno State University and was reported by many as having real aptitude for the business and great athletic ability, was given a developmental deal. He speculated he may have been Don Frye's brother, but that was a different person in camp. Jim Cornette is expected to be ready to start his WWF Farm Team territory based in Louisville with Dan Briley on July 1st. The plan for the May 16th UK pay-per-view show from Manchester, England is Austin vs. Undertaker vs. Triple H for the title, Shane McMahon vs. X-Pac, Mankind vs. Gunn, Kane vs. Mideon, Brood vs. Acolytes and Viscera, Gilbert vs. Tiger Ali Singh and Sable vs. Tori, which no longer will be an evening gown match where the loser has to be stripped to their panties, but instead a regular wrestling match, which I guess devalues the videotape on the black market by 99%. Michaels will be going to Hawaii to film the first 2 episodes of the new season of Pacific Blue. Heat on May 9th in Jacksonville drew a sellout 7,315 paying $163,082. The Ministry came out and locked the back door. X-Pac and Kane were to defend against Acolytes. Gunn attacked X-Pac and Kane chased him to the back. X-Pac was getting creamed but Road Dogg came out to be his partner, which makes total sense, but they did a double-team powerbomb on him for the pin in 3:23. The CM was destroying X-Pac and Dogg afterwards. Big Show ripped the door off the hinges and the Union made the save. The tape splicing was way off as the tape of Show ripping the door was only a split second before Mankind was already in the ring. Gunn beat Venus in 2:05 when Deborah and Jarrett distracted Venus. Kane came out after Gunn. Gunn ran away but threw Venus at Gunn and he was choke-slammed. I wonder if he wouldn't sleep with his sister either. Nicole Bass came out and gave Venus mouth-to-mouth. Now I really wonder. He somehow juiced in all this. It was pretty funny. Bob Holly did an interview and Snow came out. Holly had a ref shirt and said he was ordered by the Hardcore Championship Committee, which is as real as the Central Florida Mental Hospital, to ref a title match with Snow versus Head. Snow started doing moves and pulling objects from under the ring. Snow missed a moonsault and the table didn't break. He still pinned Head in 2 minutes, which was 90 seconds longer than this should have been because it was really bad. They announced that Snow was the new champion, since Head was the champion. Snow then put himself through the table since it's a waste of a good table not to get a meaningless pop by breaking it. Triple H beat Dogg in 2:22 when Chyna interfered, leading to the pedigree. Gunn attacked Dogg and Kane came out and Gunn ran away. Kane was about to choke slam Dogg but X-Pac came out and told Kane he was one of the good guys. Kane got really confused because he was watching a McMahon interview where he said they don't insult viewers' intelligence by doing good guys versus bad guys anymore. Big Show choke slammed Mideon twice and squeezed that stupid eye in a glass of his. Undertaker said he didn't care as Mideon would die for his cause, whatever that means. I think it's what promoters who are trying to work wrestlers on payoff say, that there's some noble cause they are working toward, like the pursuit of all that's hardcore in this world. Big Show must have heard it since he choke slammed Mideon again. Meat beat Droz with the meat grinder in 2:17. I have no idea what the meat grinder is because the cameras were on Prince Albert. Albert then ran in and did his deadly Wadata maneuver on Meat. It was one of his first TV matches, so fans didn't react to Meat and he didn't show much. Judging from his physique, they should call him something else. Hopefully he'll get over because it'll be really sad to have no charisma and being saddled with the name Meat. Rock did an interview with his arm in a sling. The CM came out but Vince and the Union cleaned house with a 2x4. The Fox Files show with the Sable segment aired trying to portray her as just an everyday church-going housewife, which is I'm sure exactly what she is. Mrs. Cleavage is Mariana Comlos, a female bodybuilder who failed trying out for Playboy's Playmate of the Millennium. She is supposed to train this month in the ring and become a wrestler. Beaver is of course Charles Warrington, originally head banger Mosh. House shows this past week were May 7th in Fort Myers, Florida, drawing a sellout 7,234 paying $165,236, and May 8th in Tampa drawing a sellout 9,351 paying $227,044. They headlined with Austin over Bossman both nights. Actually in Tampa, the final match on the show saw Patterson and Briscoe over Pete and Rodney thanks to outside interference of local DJ Bubba the Love Sponge. You know things suck for WCW when Bubba the Love Sponge jumped to WWF. Also, Rock beat Gunn, Snow and Tori beat Brown and Ivory, Undertaker beat Shamrock in a casket match. Lawler beat Test when too much interfered. Godfather beat Goldust and Venus, and Holly beat too much when DOA turned on too much, ending that gay biker angle that never went anywhere. Merchandise for the week was $213,989 or $5.91 per head. Bass will be getting a makeover on Howard Stern on May 16th. Sable is on Conan O'Brien on May 19th. KTLA in Los Angeles is doing a WWF week. Austin will be back on Regis and Kathy Lee on May 21st and Howie Mandel on May 29th. The Reader's Pages. WWF vs. WCW. Thanks for setting straight what the duties of a wrestling announcer are. After reading my own letter in the March 8th Observer, I realize how insulting it was toward Tony Schiavone. That really wasn't my intent. If Tony was planning an early retirement after reading the letter, I apologize. The duties of a wrestling announcer are to say what your boss tells you to say, although I like my version better. So, under the risk of a lawsuit from David Letterman or Desmond Devlin, I offer this list as an act of recompense. The 10 ways Nitro could destroy Raw. 10. Vince McMahon, realizing that his ego is out of control, orchestrates a double cross of himself at the 1999 Survivor Series and quits in a rage. Jim Herd takes control. 9. Hulk Hogan, realizing his ego is out of control, does a job for Chris Jericho and waives all booking control from his contract. 8. Christmas Eve 1999. Vince McMahon's father comes to visit him in the night with warning of 3 visitors he'll receive of the ghosts of wrestling's past, present and future. They turn out to be Giant Baba, Sam Mushnick, and, well, I can't think of a third honest wrestling promoter. Vince becomes a changed man. For the weeks that follow, there are many Cineburst-sponsored non-alcohol Raw parties at college campuses shown in competitive segments with Nitro. 7. The Christian Coalition forms a human wall around every WWF Raw as War Arena show and WCW agents pipe in chants of Goldberg. 6. McMahon pulls off a coup. He signs the return of the Ultimate Warrior. 5. Hogan's hairline recedes so far to where his 666 birthmark can be seen and he's fired. 4. Through a complete accident, a dress is ripped off and the woman wasn't wearing any underwear. But it was Nicole Bass. Traumatized viewers nationwide who don't get it, turn the channel on mass, switching back to TNT for many years. 3. In a mistimed bump from Viscera, Vince McMahon loses his memory and thinks it's still 1989. He turns Mankind into the Gobbledygooker's evil twin, turns Steve Austin into the nephew of Ivan Koloff. The Rock, because WWF wants RJB Nabisco as a sponsor, becomes the Cooker, the son of Chef Boyardee. The Undertaker remains unchanged but is destroyed in a program with the current world champion. See item 6.2. Fed up, Ted Turner offers McMahon twice what he paid Hogan to run WCW. Chris Jericho becomes a big star. 1. Through a weird series of events, Vince McMahon, James Cameron, Bryant Gumbel, Jimmy Johnson and Barbra Streisand are trapped in a locker room. Barbarians at the Gate meets Lord of the Flies and nobody gets out alive. Rob Smith. Sarasota, Florida.